Tonight we stand at the edge of a trench in southern Iraq, where the earth opens like an old mouth. In 1922, excavators working at ancient Ur began lifting tablets from the dust. Under the direction of Sir Leonard Woolley, whose discoveries later filled museum cases in London and Philadelphia, scholars at Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania have long studied these broken records, and what they reveal is calm, strange, and difficult to dismiss. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quiet, write your location and local time below, because somewhere else, someone is also listening in the dark. You are not entering a loud mystery tonight. You are entering clay, silence, and memory. The air is dry around you, tasting faintly of dust and sun-baked salt. A wind moves low across the plain, brushing against reed huts, broken bricks, and old walls pressed deep beneath centuries of earth. Above you, the sky has the colour of cooled bronze, and the first stars appear like small holes in a curtain. Here, in the land between the rivers, the names of the Anunnaki once rose from temple songs. They were called great powers, judges, rulers, presences above and below. Yet the oldest stories do not always begin with them. Some seem to lean backward, toward something dimmer, something older. A tablet does not speak clearly, it mutters. It breaks at the most inconvenient places, which is very rude of history. Honestly, one line survives, 3 vanish, a name appears, then crumbles into dust. The scholar bends closer, and the ancient world refuses to finish its sentence. Still, records confirm that Sumerian scribes preserved traditions about times before known kingship, before cities carried royal names, before order was described as resting in human hands. The Sumerian king list, studied by generations of historians at major universities, famously begins with kingship descending from heaven. That phrase is simple, almost sleepy, yet it opens a door. If kingship descended, where had it been? And who remembered its arrival? Your mind drifts toward the black clay tablets, fired by accident in ancient destruction, hardened by flames that meant to erase them. They sit in museums now, quiet behind glass, but once they belonged to temples filled with oil smoke, wool garments, whispered prayers, and tired scribes scratching signs into wet clay. The reed stylus presses down. The sign remains. Somewhere inside those signs is a world that believed history had layers. Not one beginning, not one clean dawn, but many dawns, folded together like linen in a priestly storeroom. The Sumerians looked behind themselves and saw not emptiness, but inheritance. They were not the first to wonder. Long before recorded history, people had walked the alluvial plains, fished in marshes, buried their dead, shaped figurines, built shrines, and watched the rivers rise. Archaeologists identify cultures before Sumer, including Ubaid communities whose painted pottery and temple foundations show organized life centuries before the first written tablets. That is the mainstream ground beneath the dream. There were people here first. Their houses were made from mud brick, their floors packed hard by bare feet. Children slept beside woven baskets. Dogs moved near cooking fires. Fish bones dried in the heat. At dawn, women carried water from the river, while men repaired nets under a sky already blazing white. No golden gods appear in the archaeological report. No shining council steps from the clouds. Yet the ground itself says continuity, and continuity can become memory. The fringe tidbit, softer and stranger, is that some modern readers claim these pre-Sumerian layers preserve echoes of beings even older than the Anunnaki. They point toward half-lost names, unexplained divine lists, and myths where creation is already underway before familiar gods take their seats. It is not accepted as fact, but it has a peculiar gravity, because ancient memory rarely begins at the beginning. It begins where people are afraid to forget. Among scholars, debate continues over how much of early Mesopotamian myth reflects actual cultural memory. and how much reflects sacred storytelling shaped by temple politics. Yale historians have described myth as a living structure, not a simple record, and that distinction matters. A myth may not give you a date, but it can preserve an anxiety. It can preserve the feeling that something came before. You stand now beside the trench again, as twilight folds into night. The workers have gone, their footprints remain in powdery soil. A broken jar lies half exposed near a wall, and its curve catches the last light. There is a smell of dry reeds nearby. Perhaps a settlement once stood here, modest and ordinary. Perhaps smoke rose from bread ovens. Perhaps a priest once walked this ground with oil on his hands, believing that beneath the temple floor slept powers too old to name casually. The Sumerians did not imagine time as a straight road leading neatly to themselves. Their stories often feel like canals, splitting, joining, disappearing underground, then reappearing in another field. A god becomes a title, a city becomes a memory becomes a ritual becomes a tablet, and then, one evening thousands of years later, you read it, not as a judge, as a listener. The Anunnaki, in later traditions, stand like tall figures at the edge of creation. Yet if you listen closely, their world seems already furnished. There is earth beneath them. There is water beneath the earth. There are decrees, boundaries, offices, gates, and ancient forces already moving. That is the quiet disturbance. Not that the tablets explain everything, because they do not. Not that they prove a lost age with perfect clarity, because they cannot. The disturbance is gentler than that. It is the sense that the Sumerians inherited a story already old when they began writing it down. Imagine the first scribe who copied a list from an older copy. He may not have understood every name. He may have paused over signs from a tradition his teacher treated with careful respect. Outside, donkeys complained in the street. Inside, the clay waited. A small lamp flickered. Wax smoke thickened the room. He pressed the stylus, and another fragment survived. Perhaps that is how the hidden age remains with us, not as a complete kingdom beneath the sand, but as pressure inside later stories, a missing shape, a shadow behind the gods, a silence that gives the known myth its depth. The earth keeps such silences patiently. It lets cities rise. It lets them boast. It lets kings carve their victories into stone. Then it covers everything with dust, allowing future hands to uncover only enough to become curious. You feel that curiosity now, heavy and slow. The night over Mesopotamia is wide. In the distance, marsh water glimmers under starlight. Frogs call from reeds. A breeze moves across the plain and slips through broken walls where no roof remains. The world feels empty, but not uninhabited. It feels remembered. Perhaps the age before the Anunnaki was not a single empire, not a shining lost civilization waiting politely for a documentary title. Perhaps it was a chain of forgotten peoples, environmental shocks, sacred experiments, and inherited symbols. Perhaps the Sumerians gathered those fragments and gave them divine names. Or perhaps, in a time no longer remembered, someone else had already asked the same question. What came before the gods? The tablet does not answer. It only waits. And you, lying still as the ancient dark settles around you, begin to sense that history is not a wall behind us. It is a doorway left slightly open, with dust along the threshold, and a faint breath moving through from the other side. You walk where the city has no name, only a low rise beneath the sand. At first, it looks like nothing worth remembering. A mound, a slope, a scatter of pale pottery beneath the sun. Yet the quiet is deceptive, because under your feet lie rooms, hearths, storage pits, courtyards, and doorways pressed flat by time. The place does not announce itself. It waits, like a thought almost recalled. The wind moves softly across the plain, dragging grains of dust against your ankles. Each step lifts the smell of dry clay, old straw, and salt from vanished floods. Somewhere far away, a bird calls once, then falls silent, as if even the living world has entered a museum. Here the story deepens beyond the famous cities. Archaeological records confirm that southern Mesopotamia held thriving communities before the rise of Sumerian writing and kings. The Ubaid culture, known from sites studied by universities such as Chicago, Oxford, and Pennsylvania, built temples, traded goods, shaped painted pottery, and organized settlements long before the earliest dynastic rulers. That fact is plain, grounded, and very inconvenient for anyone who wants history to begin neatly. History refuses neat beginnings. You kneel beside a broken bowl, its painted lines are simple, dark, and careful, curving around the clay like river paths seen from the sky. Someone held this object before tablets carried royal names. Someone placed grain inside it, or milk, or dates, or perhaps an offering for a household spirit whose name is now lost. There is no crown here. There is still order. The buried houses are modest, but they speak in small gestures. A doorway faces a courtyard. A hearth sits near a wall. Storage jars cluster in one corner, suggesting food, planning, and seasons counted by necessity. A child once reached for something forbidden. A mother probably sighed, because some parts of civilization require no invention. The strange thing is not that these people existed. The strange thing is that later Sumerian memory seems to rise from a landscape already shaped by older hands. Temples did not suddenly appear from emptiness. Ritual did not wake one morning and decide to become complicated. It grew from earlier habits, repeated until they hardened into sacred law. Your fingers brush a shard warmed by the sun. It is rough and ordinary. That ordinariness is what unsettles you. Lost ages rarely look like golden palaces at first. They look like cooking smoke, mud walls, reed mats, and patient labour. They look like a world preparing itself for names it has not yet learned to write. A council decree from much later periods proves how seriously Mesopotamian cities treated sacred foundations. But the instinct is older than decrees. Even before writing, communities marked special buildings apart from ordinary homes. Archaeologists have found platform structures and ritual spaces that suggest shared belief, shared labour, and shared fear. Fear can build beautifully. A temple is not only a place of worship, it is also a statement that the world has layers. Above, the sky watches. Below, the dead listen. Between them, humans stack bricks and hope the arrangement holds. A little dramatic, perhaps. But mud brick has always enjoyed pretending to be eternal. In the fading light, you notice the mound differently. It is no longer empty ground. It is a collapsed memory palace. Every inch contains decisions made by people who had no idea they would one day become a preface to someone else's civilization. The fringe tidbit waits in the pottery cases and old excavation notes. Some unusual Ubaid figurines, with elongated heads and staring eyes, have inspired modern speculation about strange visitors, serpent people, or forgotten priestly lineages. Scholars generally explain them as stylized ritual objects, perhaps linked to fertility, identity, or household cult. Still, in dim museum light, those faces do have a way of staring back. One should not build a universe from a figurine. But one may pause. Their eyes are wide, almost sleepless. Their bodies are small, shaped by human fingers with no intention of answering modern questions. Perhaps they represented ancestors, perhaps spirits, perhaps something far more ordinary, which is often the most disappointing option for a good mystery, and therefore probably deserves respect. Among researchers, debate continues over whether Ubaid society was ruled by powerful elites or organized through looser forms of community leadership. Some scholars from Stanford and Cambridge have framed early complexity as a gradual negotiation rather than a sudden invention. That matters because it changes the mood of the forgotten age. It may not have been ruled by kings, but it was not simple. You pass into an imagined house. The roof is low, made of reed bundles plastered with mud. The floor feels cool beneath your bare feet. A clay oven gives off stored heat, and the faint scent of bread clings to the air. Outside, water channels glimmer under the moon, guiding life through a land that can be generous one season and merciless the next. In such places, memory forms slowly. A flood comes. The people rebuild. A drought comes. They move the grain jars. A child asks why the old mound is forbidden. An elder answers with a story, not because it is precise, but because stories are lighter to carry than disaster. Little by little, the landscape fills with remembered warnings. Do not build there. Do not anger the waters. Do not neglect the shrine. Do not forget those who lived here first. That last command is the oldest. The silent cities beneath sand are not silent because nothing happened. They are silent because their language has not survived. No long royal inscriptions introduce their leaders. No heroic poem praises their builders. They left no grand explanation, which feels rather unfair considering how many questions we have brought with us. Instead, they left patterns. Painted pottery spreads across regions. Architectural forms repeat. Trade objects travel farther than expected. Burials reveal care, difference, and symbolic thought. These are not whispers of fantasy. They are the slow grammar of human society forming itself before the age of written names. You look toward the horizon, where heat still trembles above the land. Beyond the mound, other mounds rise faintly, almost hidden. Each one is a sealed room in the longhouse of time. Some contain villages, some temples, some only fragments too damaged to interpret. Yet together they suggest a world dense with life, not empty, not waiting passively for Sumer. The older settlements become a kind of submerged foundation for everything that follows. They are the dark soil beneath the garden, the buried root beneath the flower. Later myths would speak of gods assigning offices, measuring destinies, and arranging the world. But here, before those stories took written form, humans were already arranging. They measured fields, they stored seed, they watched stars rise over canals. Perhaps that is where the lost age hides, not in a single vanished capital, but in the accumulated intelligence of communities whose names dissolved before history learned to preserve them. Their world was practical, sacred, fragile, and enduring. It carried enough structure to be remembered, yet not enough writing to defend itself from oblivion. The moon rises higher. The mound turns silver and cold. You stand among walls that barely rise above the soil, and the silence begins to feel inhabited. It is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of people who have stepped into another room and closed the door carefully behind them. And beneath the famous gods, beneath royal cities, beneath the stories carved into clay, these nameless settlements remain patient, dust-covered, still holding the first shape of a question that has not finished unfolding. What did Sumer inherit from those who vanished before it? The sand gives no easy answer. It only gathers around your feet. Your eyes move across a clay tablet where the first line feels almost too calm. Kingship came down from heaven. There is no trumpet in the sentence. No explanation follows with the patience modern readers would appreciate. The ancient scribe simply places the thought before you, as if everyone sensible already knows that rule is not merely invented. It arrives. It descends. It settles onto earth like dust on a sleeping field. The tablet is known today as part of the Sumerian king list, a work copied in different versions by scribes who believed history could be arranged through cities, rulers, and sacred time. Records studied by scholars at Oxford, Chicago, and Yale confirm that this text joins mythic rulers with later historical kings, creating a strange bridge between memory and administration. It is a list, yes, but a list with dreams caught inside it. You lean closer to the signs. They do not hurry. The early names are wrapped in impossible reigns, thousands upon thousands of years, stretching far beyond ordinary human life. Later rulers become more recognizable, more earthly, more believable. The transition is subtle. like waking from a dream but still feeling it on your skin. Here lies the first shadow of a time before rulers as humans understand them. Not because no one led, commanded, organised, or argued over barley. Humans have always been remarkably gifted at arguing over resources. The mystery is different. It is the idea that legitimate kingship was remembered as something external, something bestowed, something older than the cities that claimed it. You stand in an imagined scribal school, where boys repeat signs under watchful teachers. The room smells of damp clay, wool, and lamp smoke. Reed styluses lie in a bundle near a low bench. Outside, a donkey brays with the confidence of a minor official. Inside, a student copies names he cannot possibly comprehend. Alulim. Alalga? Then other names follow, worn smooth by repetition and distance. They belong to cities such as Eridu and Bad Tibera, places that ancient tradition placed near the beginning of the order. Whether these figures were remembered chiefs, divinized ancestors, symbolic placeholders, or sacred fiction remains uncertain. That uncertainty is the doorway. Mainstream historians agree that the Sumerian king list was not written as modern history. It shaped political legitimacy, linking later dynasties to a sacred sequence of rule. Research from major universities has shown that such texts often served power, teaching people that the present order had ancient approval. That is the sensible reading. And yet, even propaganda has ancestors. A king who claims heaven gave him authority is still borrowing from an older structure of belief. He does not invent the idea from emptiness. He reaches into the deep cupboard of culture, pulls out a sacred garment, and tries it on before the crowd. Very dignified, naturally. The old phrase tells you something about how Mesopotamians imagined the earliest world. Before kings ruled earth, rule existed somewhere else. Before cities held the office waited beyond them. That is a remarkably haunting thought for such a short line. The fringe tidbit appears in the exaggerated reigns. Some alternative writers have claimed these vast numbers encode astronomical cycles, lost calendars, or memories of non-human rulers. Scholars remain cautious, often seeing them as symbolic, theological, or literary magnifications. Still, the numbers create a strange atmosphere, as if time itself has been stretched to make room for beings who do not fit ordinary measurement. You may not believe the numbers, but you feel their weight. A reign of 28,000 years does not belong in a tax record. It belongs to the edge of imagination, where a city becomes older than its own ruins, and a ruler becomes less a person than a season of the cosmos. The scribe does not seem embarrassed by this. He copies it with composure, which is almost more unsettling. Perhaps exaggeration served reverence. Perhaps vast time made ancient authority feel unreachable. When a ruler is placed at the beginning of all order, disagreement becomes impolite, and if there is one thing kings have always enjoyed, it is making disagreement seem cosmically improper. Your mind drifts through Eridu, one of the oldest sacred cities of southern Mesopotamia. Archaeology has revealed a sequence of temples there, rebuilt again and again on the same holy spot. Each new structure rose above older foundations, preserving continuity through repetition. The site itself becomes a memory device, a staircase made of shrines. You feel the steps beneath you, mud brick under mud brick. A temple is rebuilt because the place matters. The place matters because something is believed to have happened there, or to remain there, or to listen there. Even when walls collapse, sanctity clings stubbornly to the ground. It is a very old habit of sacred architecture, this refusal to move house. Among scholars, discussion continues over how the earlier cities transformed religious leadership into political kingship. Some historians argue for temple-centered administration, while others emphasize competition among emerging urban elites. The debate remains alive because the evidence is fragmentary, and the fragments do not politely form a complete diagram. They flicker. They resist. You follow the idea of kingship before kings, and it leads not to a throne room, but to a threshold. On one side stands social reality, irrigation, grain storage, labour, defence, trade, and the tiresome miracle of organising people. On the other side stands sacred memory, heaven, destiny, divine appointment, and old names that stretch beyond common sense. Between them, the human ruler appears. He's not merely a manager, he is a hinge. The world before rulers, then, may not mean a world without leadership. It may mean a world before leadership was captured by royal ideology, before one man could stand above others and say the universe had filed the appropriate paperwork, before cities learned to dress power in divine language. That possibility is quieter than giants, but perhaps more revealing. You see a gathering by torchlight in a settlement not yet famous. Elders sit near a shrine, grain has been counted, water channels need repair. Disputes must be settled before they harden into feuds. Someone speaks with authority, but not yet as a king. Someone remembers the customs. Someone knows the old offerings. Someone says the ancestors would not approve, which has always been a useful sentence. The community listens, not because a crown shines, because memory has weight. Over generations, such weight can become office. Office can become ritual. Ritual can become title. Title can become myth. And myth, pressed into clay, can tell later people that kingship descended from heaven, when perhaps it also rose from mud, labour, fear, and trust. Both can be true in different ways. That is the beauty of ancient memory. It does not separate the practical from the sacred as cleanly as we do. A canal is engineering, but it is also survival. A temple is architecture, but it is also negotiation with unseen order. A ruler counts grain, but he also claims to steady the cosmos. Modest job description, really. The phrase before rulers begins to glow differently now. It suggests a period when authority was still fluid, not yet sealed inside dynasty. It hints at remembered transitions, from villages to cities, from elders to kings, from local shrines to state temples, from inherited custom to written lists. The tablet keeps its face blank. It does not explain itself, yet you can sense the anxiety beneath its order. By listing rulers from the beginning, the scribe tries to tame time. He places names in rows, numbers beside names, city beside reigns. Chaos becomes sequence. Memory becomes bureaucracy with a sacred haircut. But the earliest entries remain strange. They refuse to become ordinary. The old list gives you no clear portrait of the lost age. It offers something more delicate and perhaps more honest. It offers a memory that rule itself was once a mystery, that human power needed an origin beyond human hands, and that before known kings stood the idea of authority waiting in darkness. You sit with that thought as night settles around the ancient schoolroom. The students are gone. The teacher has covered the clay tablets with cloth. Outside, the city breathes softly, full of sleepers who believe their walls are protected by powers older than stone. A lamp burns low, the signs dry slowly, and somewhere inside those signs, before the first earthly throne becomes firm, there is a pause in history. A dim space where leadership has not yet hardened into kingship, where memory has not yet become a list, and where the human world is still listening for the voice that tells it who may rule. Your feet carry you away from the baked southern plain and into a colder, older morning. The rivers here are not yet hemmed by city walls. They run through reed beds, gravel banks, and dark soil where wild grasses bend beneath a pale wind. Mist clings to the water. The air smells of wet stone, animal hide, and smoke from a small fire that refuses to die. You crouch beside that fire. Its warmth is uncertain. Around it, people sit close together beneath an enormous sky. Their tools are sharp, their clothes are simple, and their eyes are trained upon movement. A bird lifting from reeds matters, a deer track matters, a change in the clouds matters. In this world, attention is not a hobby, it is survival. Long before cities rose in Mesopotamia, Humans gathered near rivers and springs across Western Asia. Archaeological research from universities such as Oxford, Yale, and Arizona has confirmed that communities in the Fertile Crescent gradually developed new relationships with plants, animals, and place. This was not one sudden invention. It was a slow turning of the human mind towards settlement. You watch hands feed dry twigs into flame. No one writes yet. No one lists kings. Still, knowledge is present. A woman studies seeds in her palm, separating useful grain from bitter grass. A hunter repairs a point of worked stone. An elder lifts a child's hand toward the stars, tracing a path that perhaps means season, direction, warning, or simply wonder. The first fires by ancient rivers hold more than heat. They hold memory before writing, pass through gesture, song, imitation, and repeated tasks. A child learns where water tastes clean. A young man learns which marsh hides snakes. A grandmother knows which root soothes fever, and she's probably tired of explaining it to careless people. Such knowledge can look humble. It is not humble. It is the foundation beneath every temple, palace, and tablet to come. Before a priest can measure heaven, someone must learn how to keep a fire alive in damp weather. Before a city can feed scribes, someone must understand the stubborn personality of barley. The strange question is how these scattered skills became sacred memory. At some point later, peoples looked back and did not see only ancestors. They saw teachers, culture bringers, mysterious figures who arrived with gifts. Myths across Mesopotamia often preserve the idea that knowledge was not simply discovered, but given. That feeling matters. In ancient traditions, wisdom often comes from beyond the ordinary camp. It comes from the deep waters, the mountains, the sky, or beings who stand at the edge of human understanding. Whether those beings are gods, ancestors, sages, spirits, or poetic masks remains debated. The fire cracks softly. Sparks rise and vanish. The mainstream fact is steady beneath your feet. The shift toward farming in the ancient Near East took thousands of years, shaped by climate, experimentation, and human adaptation. Studies published in major scientific journals have shown that early cultivation emerged through long relationships between people and wild plants. Not through a single brilliant afternoon when someone looked at wheat and became suspiciously organized. That would be convenient. History prefers patience, yet the fringe tidbit enters quietly through the tales of sudden instruction. Some modern interpreters suggest that the earliest myths of teachers preserve memories of advanced survivors from a forgotten age, people who carried knowledge through catastrophe and shared it with smaller communities. It is speculative, and most scholars do not accept it as proven. Still, the image lingers. Strangers arriving beside the river with seeds, measures, and warnings. You can almost see them, not shining, not theatrical, just figures emerging at dusk, carrying baskets, speaking in a dialect that feels old even to those who hear it. They show how to dig a channel, they mark the moon's return, they warn that the river rises when distant snows melt, which sounds like magic until someone has watched mountains long enough. Perhaps every teacher looks supernatural to the unprepared. The early riverbank grows darker. A child falls asleep against someone's knee. Dogs nose around the edge of the camp, hoping for scraps with the timeless optimism of dogs everywhere. Beyond the firelight, the reeds stir, and the unseen world presses close. People in such a landscape do not separate nature from spirit. The river gives fish, then takes a child. The storm waters the plants, then tears the shelter apart. The sky guides travellers, then disappears behind cloud. Gratitude and fear braid together until every place seems alive. Among scholars, debate continues over whether ritual life helped drive settlement, or whether settlement made complex ritual possible. Some researchers at Stanford and Cambridge have argued that shared ceremonies may have drawn communities together before full agriculture took hold. Others see ritual as growing from the new pressures of stored food and permanent places. Either way, belief gathers people, A fire is also a circle. A circle is also a boundary. Inside it, stories can be repeated until they become older than the storytellers. Outside it, darkness waits, full of animal eyes and imagined presences. You listen to one of these stories. A voice speaks of a time when the world was softer, when beings walked nearer to humans, when knowledge was carried from hidden places. The details are not yet Sumerian. The names are not yet those found on temple tablets. But the shape is familiar. Humanity receives, remembers, and misremembers. The story moves like smoke. It changes with each telling. A flood becomes a warning from a spirit. A clever ancestor becomes a sacred teacher. A rare traveller from the coast becomes a being from the waters. A lost community with better tools becomes a people from before the present world. This is not foolishness. This is how memory survives without shelves, libraries, or archivists guarding silence behind important expressions. Oral tradition preserves meaning through image. It chooses what can be carried in the mind. So the river becomes a road between worlds. The fire becomes the first school. And the teacher becomes more than human. You feel the cold ground beneath you. It's not the warm clay of the later cities. It is damp, alive, and unfinished. The people around you do not know that their descendants will become farmers, builders, singers, priests, merchants, and scribes. They know only hunger, weather, birth, death, and the fragile comfort of shared flame. Yet somewhere in their world, the hidden timeline begins to thicken, not with names carved into stone, but with patterns repeated across generations. Watch the stars, keep the seed, honour the dead, listen to those who remember, beware the river when it grows too quiet. Simple commands, ancient commands. In time, commands become customs, customs become rites, rites become myths, myths become clay. And when later scribes write of divine knowledge descending into human life, perhaps some of the glow comes from these early fires, reflected across thousands of years. A scent of crushed herbs drifts from the edge of the camp. Someone has thrown leaves onto the coals to keep insects away. The smoke curls upward, bitter and clean. You breathe it in, and imagine how easily practical action becomes sacred gesture when repeated under stars. Perhaps the first incense was complaint management. The night deepens. The river sounds larger now, speaking in slow syllables over stones. A young watcher lifts his head at every noise. An elder continues murmuring to the child, not because the child understands, but because memory must begin somewhere. What came before the great gods may have been this: humans learning to survive so intensely that survival became holy. Fire, seed, water, sky, and teacher were not separate categories. They were one woven experience, held together by danger and gratitude. You turn from the fire toward the dark river. Its surface reflects no city lights. Only stars tremble there, broken by the current. They look like signs not yet pressed into clay, bright marks waiting for a hand that has not been born. The people sleep close together, while the oldest knowledge keeps watch through the night. And in that quiet, before kings, before tablets, before the famous divine names, the first hidden age breathes beside the water, warming its hands above a small flame. The clay in your hands is blackened, cracked, and heavier than it should be. It has survived fire, collapse, damp rooms, careless digging, and the long boredom of centuries. A corner is missing. Several lines are wounded. One sign seems clear, then breaks exactly where the meaning begins to matter. Ancient scribes had a gift for dramatic inconvenience. You sit in a quiet archive room, where the air smells of dust, wool cloth, and old paper labels. A lamp casts soft light across rows of tablets, each one resting like a sleeping animal. They do not shine. They do not announce treasure. They simply wait with the stubborn patience of baked earth. A curator turns one tablet gently. The marks catch shadow. Records confirm that Mesopotamian temple libraries and palace archives preserved myths, hymns, rituals, legal texts, and divine lists across many centuries. Scholars from the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, and the British Museum have studied these fragments as evidence of a vast scribal world where memory was copied, sorted, corrected, and sometimes misunderstood by later hands. That last part matters. A tablet is not only a message from the past, it is also a copy of a copy, touched by students, priests, officials, and tired workers who probably wanted dinner. Some texts preserve traditions far older than the tablet itself. Others blend sacred poetry with local politics. Because humans rarely resist improving ancient truth when funding and authority are involved. You look down at the signs. Some names are familiar. Others feel like footsteps heard behind a wall. Mesopotamian god lists often arrange divine beings into families, offices, ranks, and older layers of power. The famous names stand in clearer light, but around them gather lesser-known figures, primordial forces, river spirits, underworld presences, and powers tied to creation before the ordered world fully forms. These are not always the Anunnaki. Some seem older in function, if not in written appearance. They are not gods of city gates or royal victory. They are waters, depths, darkness, foundations, birth, clay, sky before naming, earth before boundary. They feel less like rulers and more like conditions. The room grows colder. Perhaps it is only imagination. In some creation traditions, the world begins not with a throne, but with mingled waters. Before temples, before people, before kings, there is depth. Fresh water and salt water are imagined as ancient powers, not merely substances. This is a mainstream observation in the study of Mesopotamian mythology, explored often by historians from Chicago and Oxford. Water comes first. Not crowns, not weapons. Water, dark and moving away, becomes the first memory. It has no fixed shape, which makes it perfect for beginnings. It can cradle life, erase fields, carry boats, drown villages, and reflect stars with absolute innocence. Very suspicious behaviour, really, for something so essential. The black tablets whisper of this older world, not loudly, never conveniently. They offer broken phrases about primordial beings, divine births, ordered heavens, and earth separated from what came before. Later gods organize the cosmos, but the material of the cosmos is already present, ancient and waiting. You begin to sense a pattern. The Anunnaki may belong to a structured divine society, with offices, judgments, assemblies, and powers. But beneath that structure lie stranger presences, closer to raw existence. They are not personalities in the way later listeners might prefer. They are forces wearing names because humans need something to address when standing near the unknown. The fringe tidbit moves quietly through the damaged divine lists. Some alternative researchers claim obscure gods and broken names point to an erased pantheon before the Anunnaki, a sacred order deliberately folded into later mythology. Serious scholars are cautious, usually explaining these layers as regional traditions, theological development, and scribal classification. Still, the sense of buried depth remains, not erased, perhaps absorbed. That is how old religions often survive. A local river spirit becomes an attendant of a greater god. A mother of creation becomes a line in a hymn. A terrifying earth power becomes a name invoked in ritual, carefully, briefly, then set aside. The old does not vanish. It takes a smaller room inside the new house. You imagine a temple library at night. Clay tablets line shelves along the wall. A priest enters with a lamp, shielding the flame from drafts. He selects an old composition, not because he fully understands it, but because the rite requires the ancient words. The signs are copied from a tradition his teachers received from theirs. The chain reaches backward into darkness. His lips move as he reads. The old names return. A smell of oil smoke thickens the chamber. Outside, a city sleeps beside canals. Inside, the dead language of ritual becomes briefly alive. A word for abyss, a word for beginning, a word for a mother before mothers, a word for a father before fathers, a word whose meaning has thinned but not disappeared. Among scholars, debate continues over whether primordial figures in Mesopotamian texts preserve independent ancient myths or were shaped later to create orderly genealogies for the gods. Some researchers at Yale and Harvard describe these divine lists as intellectual systems, while others emphasize living worship and local memory behind them. The argument remains open because clay preserves words better than intentions. Intentions are slippery. They escape the stylus. The tablet before you shows a line where a name has been partly lost. Only the beginning remains, followed by a crack. It feels theatrical, but the damage is ordinary. Soil pressure, salt, heat, and time have done what invading armies could not finish. They have turned theology into ellipsis. You resist the urge to fill the gap too eagerly. That is where fantasy often enters wearing very clean sandals. Yet imagination has its place when used gently. You can picture what the gap represents. Not a secret code, but a vanished inheritance, a tradition once known well enough not to require explanation. The scribe didn't write for you. A little humbling, yes. He wrote for a world where certain names carried weight in temple rooms. He wrote for students trained in sign lists, for priests performing rites, for officials preserving cultural prestige, for gods who were expected to appreciate proper documentation. Modern curiosity was not on the agenda. Still, the tablets remain. Their broken condition becomes part of their voice. If they were complete, perhaps they would feel less ancient. Because they fail, they invite listening, because they fragment. They reveal that history is not a smooth corridor, but a house with collapsed floors and locked inner rooms. You turn another tablet. This one preserves a hymn where divine order emerges from older disorder. The language is formal, almost ceremonial. It does not explain the lost age directly. Instead, it assumes a memory of depths beneath the organized world. The gods do not create from nothing. They arrange, separate, command, and name. There was always something there. That thought settles slowly. It suggests that what came before the Anunnaki may not have been a rival kingdom of gods, standing politely in line to be forgotten. It may have been a different kind of sacred thinking, one focused on origins, waters, darkness, fertility, earth, sky, and the terrifying uncertainty before order. Then later tradition gave that uncertainty a court. Judges appeared, ranks appeared, assemblies appeared. The wild beginning received a bureaucracy, which is perhaps the most Mesopotamian outcome imaginable. Yet even bureaucracy cannot tame the abyss completely. The black tablets preserve its damp outline. In their cracks, you feel the older powers breathing. Not as monsters, not as space travellers, not as proof of every fevered theory, but as remnants of a human need to remember that order rests upon something deeper. The archive room is very still now. Beyond the window, evening presses against the glass. The curator has left you alone with the tablets, and the silence feels almost ceremonial. You lower the blackened clay onto its cradle. For a moment, the signs seem less like writing and more like footprints crossing wet ground. They lead toward creation, then vanish at the edge of a water. They lead toward the known gods, then bend toward names whose meanings are lost. Perhaps the oldest divine memory is not a face. Perhaps it is depth, and as the light fades, you understand why the ancient scribes kept copying these difficult, damaged, unsettling traditions. They were not preserving answers. They were preserving the pressure of a question, pressed sign by sign into clay, so that someone far away in time might feel the darkness beneath the ordered world and wonder who or what had been remembered there. 7 marks appear on the clay, arranged with a care that feels almost deliberate. You notice them first as a pattern, not a declaration. 7 names, 7 powers, 7 gates, 7 sages, 7 days counted in sacred rhythm. The number returns so often in ancient tradition that it begins to feel less like arithmetic and more like architecture. The room around you is dim and cool, scented with reed mats, dry plaster, and a trace of old incense. A scribe has drawn lines into a tablet, dividing knowledge into columns. His hands are steady. His world believes that order can be listed, sung, invoked, and protected from chaos by the correct arrangement of names. 7 becomes one of those arrangements. Records from Mesopotamia confirm that the number 7 carried strong religious meaning across myths, rituals, and protective practices. Scholars at Yale and the University of Chicago have examined how 7 appeared in divine groups, underworld passages, temple ceremonies, and cosmic descriptions. The pattern was not random. It gave the unseen world a memorable shape. You follow that shape slowly. In one tradition, 7 sages are associated with wisdom before the flood. In another, 7 fearsome beings trouble the world. In another, 7 gates stand between the living and the underworld. 7 does not mean one thing only. It works like a key cut for many locks. That is how symbols survive. They remain useful. The 7 watchers of creation are not one clear group waiting neatly in a labelled drawer. Ancient religion is rarely that considerate. Instead, you find recurring clusters of 7, each one suggesting a system of balance, danger, knowledge, or transition. They may be helpers. They may be threats. They may be guardians at the edge between worlds. You imagine a priest standing at a temple threshold before dawn. The stones are cold beneath his feet. The sky is still dark blue, and the first birds have not yet begun their complaints. In his hand he holds a small bowl of water. He speaks 7 names, not loudly, because sacred power does not require theatrical volume. The words settle into the air. The unseen listens. Perhaps the ritual protects a newborn child. Perhaps it guards a doorway. Perhaps it restores order after sickness. In each case, 7 gives the act a structure. One name alone might feel fragile. 7 names feel like a circle closing. Mainstream research shows that ancient Mesopotamian ritual texts often used repeated numbers and sequences to organize ceremonies. Studies from Oxford and Harvard have described these patterns as practical tools for memory, performance, and sacred authority. Repetition helped priests carry complex rites through generations without losing their shape. Still, the number feels older than the tablets that preserve it. You sense it in the movement of the heavens. The visible wandering lights known to ancient sky watchers numbered 7 when counted with sun and moon among the planets. Their courses shaped omens, calendars, and royal anxieties. Nothing makes a king nervous quite like a planet behaving poetically at the wrong time. The heavens became a book. Priests read it carefully. If 7 could govern the sky, perhaps 7 could also govern creation. The number becomes a bridge between what is seen above and what is feared below. It joins stars to gates, sages to demons, ritual bowls to cosmic order. It suggests that the universe has repeated joints, places where meaning fastens itself. The fringe tidbit glides in from later interpretations of the sages. Some writers propose that the 7 ancient wise ones were memories of survivors from an earlier civilization, preserving astronomy, agriculture, and ritual after a great disaster. Scholars usually treat them as mythic culture heroes, linked to priestly wisdom and sacred tradition. Yet the idea remains strangely persistent because the sages arrive as bearers of knowledge, not ordinary rulers. They teach, they prepare, they vanish into story. In Mesopotamian memory, wisdom often feels imported from a hidden source. The sages are associated with deep knowledge, craft, ritual purity, and the world before catastrophe. They stand near the beginning, where the boundary between human and divine remains misty. You picture them not as monsters, but as figures robed in river damp and starlight. One carries measures for a temple foundation. Another understands plants that heal fever. Another watches the moon and knows when waters will rise. Another teaches how to speak to powers that do not enjoy being surprised. A practical skill, really. Ancient people lived in a world where mistakes could echo beyond the visible. Build incorrectly, and the god might withdraw favour, bury improperly, and the dead might wander. Ignore an omen, and a city might suffer. 7 watchers, 7 sages, 7 guardians offered reassurance that the world had rules, even if humans understood only some of them. Among scholars, debate continues over whether the 7 sages reflect an old priestly tradition or a later literary construction designed to give learning a sacred origin. Researchers at Cambridge and Chicago have approached the question from different angles, weighing ritual text, royal inscriptions, and mythic references. The evidence allows several careful possibilities, but no final certainty. That uncertainty is gentle tonight. It does not shout. It lets you sit with the pattern and feel its pressure. 7 may have been a sacred number because it was useful, memorable, and linked to visible heavens. Or perhaps it became useful because people already believed it touched something deep. Cause and meaning circle each other like birds above a field. The temple grows brighter as dawn approaches. A servant sweeps the floor with a reed broom. Fine dust rises, smelling of clay and old offerings. Somewhere in the courtyard, a goat objects to existence. The priest continues his work, arranging bowls, cords, small figurines, and spoken formulas in the proper order. 7 steps, 7 gestures, 7 quiet appeals. Each act rebuilds the world in miniature. That is the hidden beauty of ritual. It says creation was not finished once. It must be repeated, maintained, coaxed gently into staying organized. The gods may have arranged the cosmos, but humans must keep their little corner swept. Not glamorous, very necessary. The 7 watchers, then, reveal a forgotten system beneath the stories. Creation is not imagined as a single event, but as a structure needing guardians, measures, and cycles. Knowledge is not merely information, it is protection. A number is not merely a count, it is a pattern placed against disorder. You feel that pattern in your breathing. Inhale, pause, exhale. The world begins again in small rhythms. Ancient ritual understood this with solemn patience. Dawn returns, floods return, stars return, kings rise and fall, cities are built, abandoned, and built again. Beneath those cycles, 7 stands like a set of pillars in a dark hall. Perhaps this is why the number lingers in memory long after specific names blur. Names decay, tablets break, languages shift, but pattern survives, because pattern can be felt even when explanation is gone. A child can count 7 stones. A priest can invoke 7 gates. A storyteller can speak of 7 ancient teachers, and listeners will sense completeness before they understand why. The air in the temple is warmer now. Sunlight enters through a high opening, striking the wall in a pale rectangle. The tablet lies before you with its careful columns, each sign holding a fragment of order rescued from the confusion of time. You realize the lost age may be hiding inside such systems, not only in dramatic ruins or broken myths, but in recurring arrangements that later cultures preserved without fully explaining. 7 watchers of creation, 7 keepers of wisdom, 7 barriers between worlds, 7 reminders that existence was imagined as layered, guarded, and fragile. The scribe lifts his stylus. Another name is pressed into clay. Outside, the city begins to wake, unaware that its deepest fears and hopes have just been arranged into a number. The sky brightens. The river gleams. Somewhere beyond the fields, older stories wait beneath newer prayers, and the 7 remain, standing quietly at the edge of creation, as if counting what humanity has forgotten. The stones rise from the earth with no interest in your comfort. They are larger than expected, heavier in silence than they are in photographs. Some lie half buried, some lean at angles softened by rain, wind, and the patient pressure of roots. Around them, the landscape is open, pale, and strangely still, as if the hills themselves are listening. You stand where ruin has outlived explanation. The air smells of limestone dust, dry grass, and distant rain. A cold breeze slips along the ground and touches your hands. Beneath your feet, broken fragments crunch softly, each one perhaps a piece of wall, threshold, tool, or offering. The place does not tell you its name. It only lets you feel its age. Across the ancient Near East, archaeologists have uncovered monumental sites, older than the first Sumerian city-states. Excavations at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, studied by German and Turkish teams and widely discussed by researchers at institutions such as Stanford and Oxford, revealed carved stone enclosures built by hunter-gatherers around the 10th millennium before the Common Era. That fact remains astonishing. No kingdom is visible there, no writing, no palace bureaucracy, yet enormous stones were shaped, moved, and arranged with intention. The builders created spaces for gathering, ritual, and memory long before many older models of civilization expected such complexity. History once again refuses to behave. You walk between imagined pillars carved with animals, foxes, birds, snakes, and strange forms seem to move when clouds pass across the sun. Their bodies are not naturalistic in the ordinary sense. They feel symbolic, charged, placed where human eyes would meet them in flickering light. No one knows the full meaning. That is important. The ruins older than memory do not prove a lost empire before Sumer. They do not politely hand you a tablet saying, yes. The forgotten age had excellent stone management. What they do reveal is more subtle and perhaps more unsettling. Human beings created complex sacred places long before cities, kings, and written archives. The old equation breaks. Farming first, then villages, then temples, then gods. Not always. At some sites, ritual seems to gather people before permanent urban life fully forms. The temple, or something like it, may not be a late ornament of civilization. It may be one of the forces that helped call civilization into being. People came together because something unseen demanded attention. That thought changes the ground beneath you. You place your palm against a stone. It is cold and rough. A mainstream historical fact stands clearly here. The earliest known monumental ritual architecture in parts of Western Asia predates Sumer by many thousands of years. Research published in major scientific journals has shown that such sites required planning, labour organisation, and symbolic systems among communities once considered too simple for such achievements. Too simple, of course, is usually what later people say when they have not listened properly. The quirky tidbit waits among local legends and modern speculations. Some enthusiasts claim that carved animals at ancient stone sites encode lost constellations, disaster dates, or messages from a vanished priesthood. Most scholars remain cautious, and many such claims stretch evidence rather enthusiastically. Still, the animal carvings do invite skyward thinking, especially beneath a night bright with unfamiliar stars. You imagine the enclosure at dusk. People gather without city walls around them. They carry food, skins of water, tools, pigments, and perhaps skulls of revered dead. Smoke rises from fires. Someone chants. Someone prepares meat. Someone else complains privately about having to move another massive stone, which seems extremely fair. The gathering is social, sacred, and practical at once. That mixture feels ancient. Among scholars, debate continues over whether sites like Göbekli Tepe were primarily temples, feasting centres, ancestor shrines, social gathering places, or some combination of all these. Researchers from Harvard, Cambridge, and other major universities have explored how ritual cooperation and food production may have influenced one another. The evidence is rich, but its meaning is not settled. You can feel why. A ruin is never only a ruin. It is the final shape left by many human actions, most of them ordinary at the time. Someone sharpened a tool, someone carried water, someone taught a child where not to step, Someone placed a bone or stone in a way that mattered deeply, then never explained it to you. Very inconsiderate, honestly, yet the lack of explanation protects the mystery from becoming cheap. You're forced to stand quietly and admit that ancient people had inner worlds as complicated as yours. Their symbols may be lost, but their seriousness remains. This seriousness may be the true ancestor of the later gods. Before the Anunnaki were named in temple hymns, before divine assemblies sat in cosmic judgment, older communities were already setting apart sacred ground. They were already making places where the living met the dead, where animals became signs, where stone carried memory beyond a single lifetime. That's not a small beginning. It is immense. You look across the wider landscape, and the scattered ruins seem connected by invisible roads. Not roads of empire, but roads of attention. Caves painted by firelight, hilltop enclosures, burials arranged with care. Stones lifted toward the sky. Every site becomes a point where human beings refuse to let the world remain merely physical. They insisted it meant something. This insistence may have travelled through generations, transforming as climates shifted and communities moved. A carved animal becomes a mythic creature. A sacred enclosure becomes a temple platform. A remembered ancestor becomes a divine elder. A ceremony of seasonal return becomes a story of creation. No straight line is needed, only memory moving. The lost age hidden in Sumerian tradition may therefore include memories older than language itself, carried not as names but as forms. The raised platform, the sacred boundary, the dangerous depth below, the watching sky above, the special building that stands apart from ordinary houses. Later Mesopotamian temples may have become grander, more organized, and deeply tied to city power. Yet beneath them lies the older human gesture of marking one place as different. Here, you do not behave casually. Here, you lower your voice. Here, the unseen receives attention. The wind moves through the stones. It sounds almost like breath. As night settles, the ruin loses its edges. Pillars become silhouettes. Animal carvings turn into darker shadows within darkness. Above, stars appear in a sky not yet divided by modern names. Though ancient eyes surely found patterns there, you wonder what those builders believed they were preserving. A bargain with animals, a map of the heavens, a house for ancestors, a warning from catastrophe, a celebration of abundance. Perhaps all of these at once, because human meaning has never been tidy. The ruins older than memory do not answer the question directly. They widen it. They suggest that what came before the famous divine names was not emptiness, but a deep ritual imagination already at work across the ancient world. Human beings were building mystery into stone long before writing learned to hold it. And stone remembers differently than clay. Clay speaks through signs. Stone speaks through weight. You stand among the pillars until the cold reaches your bones. The landscape is dark now, and the old enclosure feels less abandoned than sleeping. It has lost its songs, but not its gravity. It has lost its builders, but not their intention. Somewhere in that silence, a forgotten system remains. Not a system of kings, not yet a system of written gods. A system of places, gatherings, signs, and sacred fear. Older than Sumerian memory, yet capable of flowing into it like underground water. You leave the ruins slowly, feeling that the first great temples may not have been built to celebrate civilization. Perhaps civilization gathered because the sacred place was already there. For a moment, it feels as though the sky has forgotten its own colour. You stand on a plain where the air is dim, although the sun is somewhere above you. The light has turned thin and grey, like ash mixed into water. A cold wind moves over the grasses, carrying the scent of damp soil, dead reeds, and distant smoke from fires that do not seem large enough to warm anyone. People look upward without speaking. Something has changed. In deep prehistory, climate was not a background detail. It was a ruler without a crown, capable of moving forests, drying lakes, drowning shores, and forcing human groups into new patterns of survival. Research from major universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, and Columbia has confirmed that Western Asia passed through dramatic environmental shifts as the last ice age weakened and warmer conditions slowly returned. But warming did not mean peace. The world staggered. There were sudden cold reversals, rising seas, changing rainfall, and storms that remade familiar ground. The Younger Dryas period, studied widely in climate science, brought a sharp return of cold conditions after earlier warming. For communities living near rivers, marshes, coastlands, and open steppe, such changes could have felt like the rules of creation breaking. You feel the cold settle into your hands. The firewood is damp. A child coughs near a shelter made of hides and reeds. Someone ties a basket more tightly. Someone watches the river with deep suspicion, which is sensible, because rivers have always had a talent for looking innocent before causing trouble. The old paths are unreliable now. The animals move differently. Plants bloom late, or not at all. Memory begins to harden around disaster. When the sky changes colour, people remember. They remember the summer that never warmed. They remember red sunsets after distant eruptions. They remember dust veils, strange frosts, floods that entered homes, and shorelines that vanished beneath water. They may not understand the mechanisms, but they know the feeling of a world misaligned. That feeling becomes story. Mainstream research has shown that ancient climate events shaped migration, settlement, and early food production in the Near East. Studies published in journals such as Nature and Science have linked environmental stress to changes in human behaviour, including more intensive plant use and new settlement strategies. Climate did not create civilization alone, but it pressed hard against human choices. Pressure leaves myths behind. You imagine a small group standing on a ridge above a flooded valley. Their old camp is gone. The stones where children played are underwater. A tree that once marked a burial place leans sideways in the current. Nobody says apocalypse, because the word is not theirs, but everyone understands loss. The water has taken memory. That is not a metaphor to them. It is visible. It is personal. A grandmother points toward the vanished ground and tells the young that people lived there. Years pass. The young grow old. The story becomes less exact, but more sacred. The valley beneath the water becomes a world before this world. The fringe tidbit enters through the idea of ancient cataclysm. Some alternative writers connect the Younger Dryas to comet impacts, lost civilizations, and sudden global destruction. A few scientific studies have explored impact hypotheses, but the broader scholarly community remains divided and cautious. The dramatic version often outruns the evidence, as dramatic versions enjoy doing. Still, catastrophe needs no fantasy to be powerful. A shoreline can drown slowly enough for geologists and quickly enough for families. A climate shift can unfold across generations and still feel like punishment. A drought can last long enough to turn custom into prayer. A flood can erase graves, and people will remember the dead as taken by forces below. You walk through a landscape after heavy rain. Mud grips your feet. The smell is thick, rich, almost metallic. Broken reeds lie in tangled mats along the bank. Fish flash in pools where there should be dry ground. The sky clears at the horizon, but its colour is wrong, a bruised yellow fading into grey. Such scenes may lie beneath later flood stories. Not one flood only. Many waters. The ancient Near East was a land where rivers made life possible and danger inevitable. The Tigris and Euphrates could nourish fields, shift channels, and destroy settlements. Archaeological layers at some sites preserve evidence of flooding, although scholars debate how local events became grand mythic traditions. The memory of water is difficult to contain once poets get involved. Among scholars, debate continues over how environmental stress shaped the movement from mobile life into more settled communities. Some researchers at Yale and Stanford emphasize human innovation and social networks, while others give climate disruption a stronger role. The truth may rest in the uneasy middle, where necessity imagination, and stubbornness share the same hearth. Humans adapt, then they explain. In a world without satellites, climate is not data, it is mood, omen, judgment, and hunger. The sky darkens, and someone asks what has angered the powers above. The river rises, and someone remembers an elder's warning. The sun weakens behind ash, and the children learn to fear colours their parents cannot explain. You hear their voices at night. They speak softly around a fire, naming events so the fear does not remain shapeless. The old world ended when the cold returned. The ancestors crossed the waters when the coast sank. The teachers came after the smoke covered the sun. The sacred rules were given when people had nearly forgotten how to live. Each version saves something. Not a perfect record, a meaning. Perhaps this is how a hidden timeline forms. Disaster divides memory into before and after. Before the great cold, before the waters rose, before the sky dimmed, before the people scattered. Later generations inherit these divisions, but the dates blur. The old catastrophe becomes a cosmic age. The survivors become culture bearers. The lost settlements become places of the gods. The earth itself encourages this. Layers of silt cover floors, ash falls over fields, sand hides hearths, new villages rise over old ones, and children grow up walking above people whose names no one speaks anymore. The ground becomes a stack of forgotten endings. You pause beside a drowned marsh. The reeds whisper, mosquitoes drift over dark water. A bird steps carefully through the shallows, lifting each leg like a priest avoiding scandal. The air is warm again now, but warmth does not erase what cold has taught. People who survive instability become careful storytellers. They must be. A story can warn when a map is gone. Do not camp near the old channel. Do not trust the calm river in spring. Do not ignore red skies. Do not forget that the world has changed before and may change again. This is where climate becomes sacred memory, not because every storm is divine, but because the human mind seeks relationship with forces larger than itself. A volcanic winter, a failed harvest, a sudden flood, and a strange sky all become invitations to interpret. The ancient listener does not say atmosphere. They say heaven. They do not say sediment. They say the deep. They do not say cultural resilience. They say the ancestors endured. And perhaps, when later scribes wrote of older worlds destroyed or reordered, they carried faint echoes of these environmental ruptures, the divine counsels, the flood warnings. The cycles of destruction and renewal may preserve the emotional truth of real instability across immense time. Not the weather report, the wound. The sky above you slowly darkens into night. Its strange daytime pallor is gone, replaced by stars sharp as flint. Around the camp, people sleep uneasily, wrapped in skins and woven mats. The river mutters beyond the reeds, full from rains in lands no one here has seen. You remain awake a little longer. The air has the smell that comes after storms, clean and restless. Somewhere in the distance, a bank collapses into water with a soft, heavy sound. No one wakes, or perhaps they all hear it in their sleep. When the sky changed colour, the old world did not end all at once. It thinned, shifted, flooded, froze, and forced humanity to carry memory differently. The lost age may have been shaped by such changes, not merely by beings and temples, but by weather so immense it became theology. And in the quiet after the storm, you understand why ancient people imagined creation as fragile. They had watched the world remake itself. They had smelled the mud after the waters pulled away. They had seen the heavens darken without asking permission. So they remembered. They told the children, and the children, long afterward, called it the time before. You wake into a world that has grown smaller, not empty, exactly, but scattered. The great gathering places are distant now. The flooded valleys remembered only in low voices, and the old paths have broken into local trails. Smoke rises from separate camps across the hills. each one guarding its own fire, its own dead, and its own version of what happened. The morning is pale and cold. Ash hangs in the smell of the hearth. Damp wool scratches against your skin. Somewhere nearby, a child is grinding seeds between stones with a slow, patient rhythm that sounds almost like rain. No city walls protect this place. No temple tower marks the horizon. Life has drawn itself inward. This is the long sleep of humanity, not sleep as laziness, because survival is never lazy. It is sleep as suspension, a dim passage where memory travels quietly through hunger, migration, and repetition. People live, marry, bury, gather, hunt, plant small patches, abandon them, and begin again. The world has not forgotten them, but history has not yet learned how to write their names. Archaeological research from universities such as Harvard, Oxford, and Chicago confirms that communities across Western Asia experimented with different lifeways across thousands of years. Some were mobile, some were partly settled, some built substantial villages and later dispersed. Human development did not march forward like a parade with banners. It wandered, paused, and doubled back. Very human behaviour, really. You walk through a small settlement at dusk. Houses are partly sunk into the ground, their roofs made of timber, reeds, and packed earth. Smoke leaks through openings above. A dog watches you with the solemn judgment only dogs and minor officials can perfect. Inside one house, people share food from a shallow bowl. Their world is intimate. The dead are near, sometimes buried beneath floors or close beside dwellings. Their presence is not abstract. They remain underfoot, remembered through touch, place, and daily movement. A child learns that the house is not only for the living. The floor itself has a memory. Records from early village sites confirm that burial customs could bind families to particular places. Archaeologists have found evidence of skull removal, reburial, and careful treatment of ancestral remains in parts of the ancient Near East. These acts suggest that memory, identity, and sacred presence were woven directly into domestic life. The house becomes a shrine. The family becomes an archive. No tablet is needed when the ancestor lies beneath the sleeping mat. No royal list is needed when the old woman can point to a corner and name 5 generations. But such memory is fragile. When people move, the dead remain. When the roof collapses, the names begin to thin. That thinning may be the long sleep. You listen to evening voices as they tell of a time when people knew more, when the herds were larger, when the waters were kinder, when teachers walked between camps, when the first hearth was lit by a power no one now sees. Perhaps the story changes each winter. Perhaps the children correct details and are immediately ignored, as tradition often requires. The fringe tidbit appears in these imagined golden memories. Some modern theorists suggest that many ancient cultures preserved recollections of a lost age of wisdom before catastrophe, a period later disguised as mythic ancestry. Professional scholars usually describe Golden Age stories as moral and social reflections, not literal histories. Still, the emotional pattern is widespread and strangely durable. People often remember earlier times as purer. This is not because earlier times were always better. Earlier times had infection, hunger, and absolutely dreadful dentistry. But memory smooths hardship into meaning. A lost world becomes sacred because it cannot disappoint anyone anymore. In the long sleep, humanity carries pieces of knowledge like embers wrapped in ash, planting seasons, star paths, animal migrations, healing herbs, rules for marriage, rules for mourning, rules for sharing water when everyone is pretending to be generous. Each rule protects the group. Each rule also becomes story. A mainstream historical fact gives this dream its bones. The Neolithic period in Western Asia saw the development of farming villages, domesticated animals, ritual practices, and long-distance exchange networks. Studies in scientific journals have shown that these changes unfolded unevenly across regions. shaped by local environments and social choices rather than one single origin point. There is no simple ladder. Only many pass through darkness. Among scholars, debate continues over whether farming spread mainly through migrating people, shared knowledge, local adoption, or a mixture of all three. Researchers at Stanford and University College London have used archaeology, genetics, and plant science to explore the question. The evidence suggests movement, borrowing, experiment, and adaptation, all tangled together like roots under wet soil. You look at the fields beyond the settlement. They are not grand fields, not yet the vast grainlands of later kingdoms. They are patches of intention, scratched into earth near water, and guarded from birds with weary determination. Someone has planted because memory said it might work. Someone has stored seed because the future has become a person you must feed. This is a profound change, small but immense. To store seed is to believe in a later season. To build a house is to trust a place. To bury the dead nearby is to declare that departure is not the only human answer. Slowly, beneath the surface of the long sleep, humanity begins to dream in permanent forms. Yet old fears remain. A drought can undo years of confidence. A sickness can empty a house. A rival group can take grain. A river can shift away from the fields. So people continue telling stories of powers that must be honoured, offended, persuaded, or remembered correctly. The unseen remains practical. It protects the harvest, explains the storm, watches the boundary, guards the dead, and gives shape to anxiety. In this world, belief is not decoration. It is a tool for living inside uncertainty without falling apart. The air cools as night comes. Someone sprinkles herbs near the doorway, and the scent rises sharp and green. Another person presses a hand against the wall, perhaps in farewell, perhaps in blessing, perhaps only steadying themselves after a long day. Ancient gestures are difficult to label from a comfortable future. You sit near the hearth. The flames are low. A storyteller begins softly. The tale concerns a time when the earth was closer to the sky. There were no written gods in the story, no formal temple assemblies, no divine judges with tidy offices. Instead, there are ancestors, animals that speak at thresholds, waters that remember, and a hidden place where knowledge is kept until humans are ready. The listeners know the pattern. They lean in anyway. That is how deep memory survives the long sleep. It is not preserved as exact chronology. It is preserved as atmosphere, warning, and repeated image. A mountain, a flood, a first fire, a forbidden place, a teacher who disappears, a promise that the world has ended before and yet people remain. The sleep is long because writing has not yet woken, but beneath that sleep, memory is busy. It is sorting disaster into myth, turning ancestors into sacred presences, and giving ordinary survival the glow of cosmic importance. Perhaps this is what later civilizations inherited, not a single secret archive, a human habit, the habit of making continuity from loss, the habit of seeing the dead as still involved, the habit of explaining knowledge as a gift, the habit of placing older ages behind the present, not because people know their dates, but because they feel their weight. Outside, the stars brighten. The settlement becomes a cluster of warm dots in the dark. Beyond it lie other fires, other groups, other stories, each carrying fragments of a world no one can fully reconstruct. You hear grinding stones fall silent. You hear a baby breathe in sleep. You hear the low murmur of adults speaking after children have closed their eyes, when fear and hope can finally be honest. They speak of weather, food, neighbours, dreams, and omens. They speak of the old time, not as historians, but as people trying to remain human. The long sleep is not empty. It is full of hidden work. In its darkness, humanity preserves the seeds of temples, myths, kingship, and gods. Not clearly, not consciously, but patiently, through fireside voices, buried ancestors, shared meals, and the stubborn decision to remember more than hunger. and over the quiet settlement, the night rests gently, as if covering a sleeper whose dreams will one day be carved into clay. The garden begins as a small disturbance in the wild. A patch of earth has been cleared beside a stream, not perfectly, not grandly, but with enough care to reveal intention. Stones edge a narrow bed. Young shoots lean toward the morning light. A woven fence keeps out goats, at least in theory, because goats have never respected theology or agriculture. You stand near the water and breathe in damp soil. The scent is rich and green. Here, civilization does not look like a palace. It looks like mud under fingernails, seeds hidden in a clay jar, and a person kneeling to pull weeds before sunrise. The work is quiet, almost tender, yet from such small acts, whole worlds will eventually rise. Mainstream research from universities such as Oxford, Stanford, and Yale confirms that early farming in the ancient Near East developed gradually through careful observation, repeated selection, and local experiment. People did not merely stumble into agriculture. They watched plants, protected them, moved them, saved their seeds, and slowly changed the future without fully knowing its size. That is the strange power of gardens. They begin privately, then they rearrange humanity. You walk between early plantings where wild grains grow near herbs, fruit trees, and useful shrubs. No royal canal cuts the land yet, no vast storehouse claims the harvest. Still, someone has decided that this piece of earth matters more than the scrub beyond it. Someone has made a boundary, and every boundary invites meaning. Ancient gardens were never only practical. Even later Mesopotamian texts describe orchards, date palms, irrigated fields, and sacred groves with deep symbolic force. The garden becomes a place where water, fertility, order, and divine favour meet. It is nature disciplined, but not destroyed. A polite argument with the wilderness. You can hear the stream moving over pebbles. Bees drift among pale flowers. A child chases birds from the seedbed with more enthusiasm than skill. Nearby, an older man studies the sky, judging whether rain will come or whether the plants must be watered by hand. The first gardeners are also watchers. They watch clouds. They watch insects. They watch soil crack in heat. They watch which seeds return stronger and which vanish like unreliable relatives. This attention, repeated across generations, becomes a kind of intelligence stored in practice. No tablet records it. The body remembers. A woman knows by touch whether grain is ready. A boy learns by smell when stored seed has gone bad. An elder recognizes the bitter taste of drought in a shallow well. These are not minor skills. They are a library written into hands, tongues, and habits. The quirky tidbit grows from stories about sacred plants. Some fringe writers suggest that ancient garden myths preserve memories of secret botanical knowledge, perhaps held by priestly groups before formal civilization. Scholars usually see such tales as symbolic reflections on fertility, status, and divine abundance. Yet it's easy to understand why rare plants could feel magical. A seed looks impossible. Dross, small, almost dead. Then it opens. No wonder early people saw more than food in planting. A buried seed returning green from darkness is already a sermon. It does not need a priest. Though priests later became very interested in improving the presentation, records from later Mesopotamia confirm that date palms were central to food, trade, and ritual economy. The date tree provided fruit, fibre, wood, shade, and sweetness. In southern Iraq, where heat could press upon the land like a hand, the palm became both practical companion and sacred image. You stand under one in imagination. Its shade is thin but precious. The leaves rattle softly above you. Irrigation water glints in channels at your feet. The air smells of wet clay, fruit, and green fibre. Somewhere, a worker laughs. Somewhere else, someone complains about canal maintenance, proving that civilization has truly begun. Gardens create schedules. Schedules create obligations. Obligations create authority. Once plants depend on human care, humans also become bound to plants. The harvest must be guarded. The water must be shared. The boundary must be defended. A garden quietly teaches society how to organize itself. It is a gentle teacher, also a demanding one. Among scholars, debate continues over whether agriculture was mainly a blessing, a necessity, or a trap. Researchers at Harvard and Cambridge have noted that farming increased food production, but also brought harder labour, disease risks, inequality, and dependence on fragile systems. The garden gives abundance, but it also keeps accounts. This is where the sacred orchard becomes unsettling. What if the garden is not only paradise? What if it is also the first contract? In many ancient stories, the cultivated place is beautiful, enclosed, protected, and controlled. Someone owns it. Someone guards it. Someone decides who may enter, eat, work, or leave. Order has a gate. Gates have rules. The hidden timeline begins to show a new structure. Before written gods, before divine assemblies, humans learned that life could be arranged through tended space. A field is not wilderness. An orchard is not forest. A canal is not river. Each is nature brought into relationship with human plan, human labour, and human anxiety. Later myths remember gardens as places of origin, temptation, wisdom, and loss. They are never just pleasant scenery. Something always happens in a garden. A command is given, a boundary is crossed, a fruit matters too much. Humanity changes its condition. Ancient storytellers knew the danger of cultivated beauty. A garden promises safety, but it also reveals dependence. If the water fails, the green world collapses. If pests arrive, sweetness rots. If war comes, trees are cut and fields burn. The more humans shape life, the more they fear losing control of what they have shaped. You kneel beside the stream. The water is cold. A line of ants moves along the bank with impressive administrative seriousness. Birds call from reeds beyond the fence. The small garden feels peaceful, but it is also a wager against uncertainty. Every seed placed in the ground says the future will be kind enough to arrive. Perhaps that is why sacred gardens linger so strongly in memory. They hold the moment when humans stop merely following abundance and begin trying to summon it. They hold the first confidence that Earth can be persuaded. They hold the first disappointment when persuasion fails. You imagine an early keeper of plants saving the best seeds in a sealed basket. She does not call it domestication. She calls it common sense. She chooses the fuller heads, the sweeter fruit, the stronger shoots. Year after year, her choices alter the plants. The garden remembers her decisions. Long after her name is gone, the grain carries her attention inside itself. That is a form of immortality so quiet it almost disappears. No statue, no throne, only fields that grow differently because she once noticed. This sacred orchard also teaches hierarchy to imagination. Taller trees shade smaller herbs. Water flows from one channel into another. Roots drink below while fruit ripens above. The garden becomes a living diagram of worlds layered together. Above, light. Below, hidden nourishment. Between them, the human hand. This pattern returns in temples. It returns in myths. It returns in stories where gods plant, assign, measure, and protect. The world itself becomes a garden in need of caretakers. Humanity's role begins to appear, softly and uneasily, inside the green order. Perhaps people were not merely placed on Earth. Perhaps they were imagined as workers within a cosmic estate. A comforting thought, maybe, also slightly insulting. Yet ancient stories often place humans close to labour. They dig, carry, serve, praise, build, and maintain. The garden before civilization may be where that idea first gains its emotional force. To live is to tend. To survive is to work with forces older than oneself. To neglect the field is to invite hunger and perhaps divine irritation. Evening approaches. The stream darkens under overhanging reeds. The planted beds glow briefly in golden light, each leaf outlined as if the whole small garden has become a tablet written in green. No king owns it yet. No scribe inventories it. Still, it contains the beginning of settled power. It contains sacred order in miniature. It contains dependence, beauty, labour, and the faint shadow of future temples. You step back as the first stars appear above the water. The garden seems fragile beneath them, almost too small to matter. Yet in its damp soil lies one of the deepest transformations in human history. Before the great cities, there were hands closing around seeds. Before the famous gods, there was earth waiting to be tended, and perhaps, hidden beneath later memories of divine gardens and sacred orchards, there remains the quiet astonishment of the first person who buried something dry in darkness, waited through fear, and watched life return. The water is dark when the teacher rises from it. At first, you see only ripples moving against the moonlight, spreading across the canal like rings of silver thread. Then a shape appears near the reeds, half hidden by mist and night. The air smells of wet clay, fish oil, and marsh plants crushed beneath bare feet. No one runs. That is the strangest part. The people gathered along the bank seem afraid, but not surprised. They hold lamps in cupped hands and keep their voices low. A child peers from behind a woven cloak. An old priest watches the water with the expression of someone expecting an overdue guest. The legends of Mesopotamia speak of strange sages connected with the deep waters, beings remembered as bringers of craft, law, ritual, and knowledge. Later writers described figures associated with fish-like forms, emerging from the sea to instruct humanity. Scholars at Oxford, Chicago, and Yale usually interpret these traditions as priestly myths about sacred wisdom and cultural origins. Still, the image is unforgettable. A teacher from the water, not from a palace, not from a battlefield, not from a mountain throne, from the deep, where ordinary sight cannot follow, in a land ruled by rivers, canals, marshes, and floodplains. Wisdom rising from water makes a certain ancient sense. You stand at the edge of the bank. Mud presses between your toes. The teacher's form is difficult to hold clearly. Perhaps it's a priest wearing a ceremonial fish cloak. Perhaps it's a memory of coastal travellers bringing techniques from distant settlements. Perhaps it's a mythic being, shaped by imagination until teaching itself grows fins and scales. Ancient art sometimes shows figures in fish garments, linked by scholars to ritual specialists and protective wisdom. Their presence appears in reliefs and magical traditions from later Mesopotamian cultures. The mainstream explanation is careful. These figures belong to a symbolic world where water, purity, and deep knowledge are joined. Water keeps secrets. Everyone knows this. A river hides currents beneath a smooth face. A marsh conceals paths known only to those raised among reeds. The sea, from an inland perspective, is almost too large to trust. If knowledge comes from water, it comes from a place both nourishing and dangerous. The fringed tidbit glides in with the old name of the culture bringer Oannes, recorded by later Greek language tradition from Babylonian lore. Some modern writers treat him as evidence of survivors from a drowned civilization, or even visitors from beyond human society. Scholars remain cautious, seeing the tale as a late reflection of Mesopotamian wisdom mythology. Yet even caution cannot make the story less eerie. He comes by day, he teaches, he returns to the water at night. That rhythm feels like a dream humans might create when knowledge arrives from beyond their control. The teacher does not remain to become king. He does not build a throne and start issuing tedious regulations about sandals. He instructs, withdraws, and leaves humanity changed. You listen as the marsh night deepens. Frogs call in uneven chorus. Insects tremble around lamp flames. The reeds rub together with a dry whispering sound. The gathered people smell of wool, sweat, river water, and fear held politely in place. The teacher raises a hand. Perhaps he shows how to measure a foundation. Perhaps he names the stars used for timing rituals. Perhaps he teaches the proper cleansing of a temple bowl. Perhaps he explains that knowledge must be guarded, because unprepared people can turn wisdom into another way to make trouble. Very believable, unfortunately. The mainstream historical fact behind the myth is that Mesopotamian civilization depended deeply on specialized knowledge. Irrigation, accounting, astronomy, building, medicine, and ritual required trained experts. Research from the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard has shown that scribal schools and temple institutions preserved technical learning across generations. Knowledge became sacred because revival required precision. Open the canal too late, and fields fail. Read the omen poorly, and a king panics. Measure a wall incorrectly, and the temple leans with embarrassing theological implications. Civilization rests upon people who know exact things, and exact knowledge often gathers an aura of mystery. Among scholars, debate continues over whether the sage traditions preserve memories of real priestly lineages, mythic culture heroes, or older regional tales absorbed into Mesopotamian religion. Researchers disagree because the evidence comes from different periods, languages, and ritual contexts. The figure shifts as it travels, like moonlight on moving water. You can feel that shifting now. The teacher from the sea may be many things at once, a mythic ancestor of priests, a symbol of knowledge from the deep, a memory of contact between inland cities and coastal peoples, a sacred explanation for why humans possess skills that feel too precious to be ordinary. In the ancient mind, wisdom is not casual. It must come from somewhere, and because water lies beneath and beyond the visible world, it becomes a natural home for hidden knowledge. Mesopotamian tradition often connected the sweet underground waters with wisdom, creation, and divine power. The deep was not simply geography, it was a sacred reservoir, a place before form, before noise, before human certainty. You watch the teacher step closer to the bank. His garment glistens. A child inhales sharply, then is hushed by a parent. The old priest bows, slowly, with great care. No one writes the moment down, yet memory begins working immediately. It takes the smell of the marsh, the shining skin of water, the strange visitor, and the lesson received. Then it prepares them for storytelling. Generations later, the details will change. The teacher's cloak becomes a fish body. The coastal stranger becomes a being from the deep. The ritual expert becomes an ancient sage from before catastrophe. The practical lesson becomes sacred revelation. This is not failure. It is transformation. The story keeps what matters emotionally. Humans were once ignorant, and knowledge came from beyond the familiar shore. The teacher did not belong fully to ordinary society. He crossed a boundary, gave instruction, and withdrew into mystery. The water closes behind him. The lesson remains. That pattern may hold one of the most powerful memories beneath the Anunnaki tradition. Before divine judges and cosmic courts, there are teachers. Before rulers claim authority, someone must teach measurement, speech, planting, washing, counting, remembering. A civilization does not begin only when power descends. It begins when knowledge is transmitted. And transmission is fragile. The wrong apprentice forgets. The wrong flood destroys records. The wrong ruler burns a library because history has always suffered from overconfident men near fire. So cultures protect knowledge by making it sacred. A lesson guarded by a god is hard to neglect. The marsh grows quiet near midnight. Lamps burn lower. The people return toward their houses along raised paths of packed mud. Behind them, the canal reflects the stars. It looks ordinary again, which almost makes it more unsettling. You remain beside the reeds. The water breathes softly. Perhaps no fish-cloaked being ever rose from that exact canal. Perhaps the tail is a symbolic garment placed around generations of priests, sailors, farmers, and watchers of the heavens. Yet the truth of the image endures. Humanity receives knowledge from depths it cannot fully see. And in the slow black water, beneath moonlight, and drifting reed shadows. The lost age takes on another shape, not only ancient powers before famous gods, but older teachers whose lessons became so important that memory could not leave them human. The night sky becomes a tablet without clay. You lie on a flat roof above the sleeping city, wrapped in a wool cloak that smells faintly of smoke, dust and sheep. Around you, the house is dark. A few lamps still tremble in courtyards below, where late voices fade into silence and someone pulls a wooden latch into place. Above, the stars keep working. They move with a patience that feels almost severe. One rises, another sinks. The moon thins, fattens, disappears, then returns with the serene confidence of someone who has never needed permission. To the watcher on the roof, heaven is not decoration. It is schedule, warning, promise, and memory. Ancient Mesopotamian priests and scholars became careful observers of celestial cycles. Records studied by historians at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago confirm that astronomy, omen interpretation, calendars, and ritual timing were deeply connected in temple life. The sky was read as a sacred order, not merely admired for atmosphere, though, to be fair, the atmosphere was excellent. You watch a temple astronomer mark the night with small notches and quiet calculations. His tools are simple, his discipline is not. He knows that the moon's appearance matters for festivals, offerings, contracts, travel, and royal decisions. One badly timed ritual and everyone becomes nervous with impressive speed. Time must be kept, but time is not only counted, it is structured. In ancient thought, days, months, years, and longer cycles created a hidden framework around human action. Planting, harvesting, building, purification, mourning, marriage, and kingship all needed proper moments. Life was not simply lived, it was fitted into cosmic rhythm. The hidden order of time begins there, not in abstract philosophy, but in attention. You feel the roof's baked surface cooling beneath your body. Somewhere below, a child turns in sleep. From the temple precinct comes the faint scent of oil, smoke, and cedar. A watcher murmurs a star name, then lowers his gaze to a clayboard beside him. The sky's far away. The record is near. That connection is powerful. A distant light becomes a sign pressed by a human hand. A recurring motion becomes a rule becomes a calendar becomes authority. Whoever controls time controls expectation, and expectation is one of the quiet engines of civilization. A mainstream historical fact rests here with steady weight. Mesopotamian scribes developed complex systems for tracking lunar months, intercalary adjustments, planetary movements, and omens. Later, Babylonian astronomical texts show remarkable mathematical sophistication, and scholars from major universities have traced these achievements to long temple traditions of observation and recording. The roots of that work reach deep. Long before the surviving scientific tablets, people watched the sky with fear and practical need. They noticed when certain stars returned before floods. They watched the moon for night travel. They tied seasons to animal behavior and plant growth. Over time, the heavens became a vast archive. The quirky tidbit appears in the world of omens. Ancient scholars sometimes connected strange celestial events with highly specific earthly outcomes, including royal illness, invasion, famine, or court scandal. A modern reader may smile at such confidence, but the underlying habit is familiar. Humans still look upward and then immediately check whether something has gone wrong. We have not changed much. In one archive, a line might say that if the moon appears in a certain condition, a king should beware. Elsewhere, a star's position could suggest disorder in the land. These were not casual superstitions scribbled by bored mystics. They formed a trained system, copied, debated, and consulted by specialists. The sky had bureaucracy too. Naturally, among scholars, debate continues over how much early astronomy grew from practical calendar keeping and how much from divination. Researchers at Harvard, Cambridge, and Chicago have offered different balances between observation, mathematics, ritual, and royal politics. The evidence shows no clean separation, because ancient knowledge rarely divided itself into modern shelves. The same watcher could calculate and pray, the same tablet could preserve measurement and omen, the same night could be beautiful and dangerous. You sit beside the astronomer as he studies the moon's edge. His eyes are tired, but he does not complain. He has inherited a task older than his own temple, perhaps older than the city around him. He watches not for curiosity alone, but because disorder must be detected early. Cloud crosses the stars. Everyone waits. The hidden order of time is also a defense against dread. If events recur, they can be anticipated. If the moon returns, absence is not death. If seasons cycle, winter is not final. If rituals repeat, humans participate in keeping the world intact. Time becomes less terrifying when arranged. Yet arrangement also creates unease. A cycle suggests return, but return may include disaster. Floods return, droughts return, dynasties rise, weaken, and fall. Cities are abandoned, rebuilt, renamed, and praised as eternal by rulers with very limited imagination. Ancient people knew this. Their myths often move in cycles of creation, destruction, withdrawal, and renewal. The world is made orderly, then threatened. Humanity receives knowledge, then forgets. Kingship descends, moves from city to city, and sometimes vanishes beneath floodwaters. Time is not a straight road. It is a turning wheel with mud on it. You hear the astronomer breathe. He marks another sign. Perhaps this is where older ages hide most effectively. Not in a secret chamber, but in the structure of recurrence. If priests believed that heavenly cycles shaped earthly order, then a forgotten age could be imagined as a previous turn of the same cosmic pattern. What happened once may happen again. That thought is both comforting and cold. Cycles make survival meaningful. They also make loss repeatable. The temple below is quiet now, yet its design mirrors the sky in subtle ways. Platforms rise toward heaven. Ritual calendars organize offerings. Divine statues receive care according to fixed times. The city moves through sacred rhythm like a sleeper breathing beneath a blanket. The people may not know the calculations. They feel their effects. Market days, festivals, royal ceremonies, fieldwork, and mourning all fall within time kept by specialists. The unseen order enters ordinary life through doors, meals, taxes, songs, and waiting. A cosmic system becomes the shape of a week, a month, a year, and behind the known system may lie older systems. Before written astronomy, there were watchers by fires. Before temple calendars, there were hunters tracking moonlit nights. Before omen libraries, there were elders who remembered when a star appeared before the rains. The sky connected generations because it remained visible when everything else changed. Cities fall, stars return. Of course, even stars shift over immense spans. But ancient memory did not need modern precision to sense continuity. The heavens seemed stable enough to anchor human fear. Their repetition promised that the world was not merely chaos wearing weather. You look upward until your eyes blur. The stars seem almost wet. Somewhere in that darkness, later scribes will imagine divine decrees fixed in celestial order. The gods will assign destinies. Priests will read signs. Kings will seek confirmation that their rule fits the pattern. But beneath those grand claims is a simpler human need to know when to plant, when to sail, when to mourn, when to begin again. Time becomes sacred because timing saves lives. The astronomer gathers his tablet at last. Dawn is still far away, but his watching is complete for now. He descends carefully through the roof opening, leaving you alone beneath the sky. The city remains asleep, unaware that its future has been measured in silence. You stay a little longer. A cool breeze moves over the roof. It smells of river water, plaster, and distant fields. The moon hangs low, pale as bone, while the stars continue their slow crossing. The hidden order of time does not shout. It turns. It returns. It carries memories of older watchers into the calculations of later priests. It tells humanity that every present moment may be part of a pattern begun before anyone wrote it down, and perhaps the lost age before the famous god survives there, in the ancient habit of looking upward and sensing that history is not only behind you, it is above you. It is moving. The temple floor is cooler than the night outside. You step softly across baked brick, feeling each uneven edge through thin sandals. Oil lamps tremble along the walls, their flames small and gold, and the air carries a quiet mixture of cedar smoke, damp plaster, old wool, and something mineral rising from below. This is not an empty building. It has roots. Beneath many Mesopotamian temples, archaeologists have found foundation deposits, buried offerings, inscribed objects, and earlier building levels sealed beneath later floors. Research associated with major museums and universities such as Pennsylvania, Chicago, and Oxford confirms that sacred buildings were often rebuilt upon older sacred ground, layer after layer, as if holiness gathered weight through repetition. You kneel near a loosened brick. Dust clings to your fingers. Below the visible floor lies another floor, older and darker. Below that, perhaps another. The temple is not only rising toward heaven, it is pressing downward into memory. Every rebuilding says the same quiet sentence. This place mattered before us. A priest enters with a lamp. He moves carefully, not because he fears stumbling, but because the ground has authority. The temple floor is not simply something to stand on. It covers things, buried objects, old walls, names, maybe offerings made when the building was new, or when the city was frightened, or when someone important wanted divine attention and excellent public relations. The foundation deposit could include figurines, plaques, cones, tablets, or symbolic objects placed beneath walls or thresholds. Such deposits confirm the sacred identity of a building and sometimes name the ruler who restored it. They were messages to gods, to future kings, and perhaps to the earth itself. The hidden powers below were not ignored. They were addressed. In ancient thinking, a building needed more than engineering. It needed permission. The ground had to accept it. The divine owner had to inhabit it. The forces beneath had to be appeased, named, contained, or invited into order. A temple was therefore an agreement between sky, earth, human labour, and unseen depth. You hear the priest whisper, "The words are low." Perhaps he speaks to the god of the house, perhaps to older powers sleeping under the platform, perhaps to ancestors of the shrine, those earlier forms of worship that later theology did not fully erase. The lamp flame bends, and shadows ripple across the brick like dark water. A mainstream historical fact steadies the scene. Mesopotamian cities often rebuilt temples on the same sites for centuries, preserving sacred continuity even as walls, rulers, and political fortunes changed. Excavations at places like Eridu revealed long sequences of temple construction, showing how religious memory could be anchored physically in layered architecture. This is memory you can walk on. It doesn't need a poem. The fringe tidbit waits in the idea that some buried deposits were meant to seal away dangerous older forces, not merely honour divine presence. Alternative writers sometimes imagine temple floors as lids over forgotten powers, imprisoned beings, or forbidden knowledge. Scholars usually interpret the evidence through ritual dedication, royal commemoration, and sacred protection. Still, the image of a temple as a beautiful cover over something older is difficult to shake, especially at night, especially underground. You descend in imagination into a narrow chamber below the sanctuary. The ceiling is low, the air is stale and cold. A clay jar rests near the wall, sealed with hardened mud. Beside it lies a small figurine with wide eyes, its features worn by time and salt. No one placed it casually. Human beings rarely crawl beneath sacred floors for fun. The space was prepared. The object was chosen. The gesture had meaning. even if the sentence explaining it has vanished. Among scholars, debate continues over how much foundation ritual reflected theology, royal propaganda, magical protection, or practical tradition. Researchers at Yale, Cambridge, and Chicago have offered careful interpretations, but the evidence remains partly silent. Objects can survive, while the fear that placed them there dissolves. Fear leaves shapes, not always words. You stand in the buried chamber, listening to the city above. Footsteps pass overhead. A door closes. Somewhere, a singer begins a hymn, softened by distance and brick. The sound reaches you as vibration more than melody, like the temple itself is humming. It feels alive. Ancient builders may have understood that buildings remember. A wall records labour. A floor preserves traffic. A threshold holds the pressure of countless feet. When a temple was renewed, the old structure was not treated as disposable trash. It was often enclosed, honoured, and built over, becoming a hidden ancestor of the new shrine. The past was not removed. It was buried inside. This is one reason the Lost Age can hide so well. Later civilizations do not always destroy what came earlier. They incorporate it. They build above it, rename it, sanctify it, and sometimes forget the original reason while preserving the form. The older sacred place becomes the foundation of a newer sacred story. You touch the chamber wall, the plaster flakes gently. The air tastes of salt and dust. The darkness feels thick, not evil, just old. It has held its breath for a very long time. Somewhere above, priests care for divine statues with food, clothing, music, and incense. Down here, another kind of care remains hidden, a care directed toward what must stay beneath. That contrast is haunting. Above, brightness. Below, storage of memory. Mesopotamian temples were economic centers, ritual centers, and symbols of cosmic order. They gathered grain, labor, craft goods, and authority. Yet their sacred power also depended on invisible arrangements, proper orientation, proper offerings, proper words, proper foundations. The visible institution rested upon unseen acts. How very ancient, how very human. You begin to understand why later myths speak of underworld gates, depths, and ancient beings below the earth. The built environment itself teaches such imagination. To enter a temple is to stand between vertical realms. The god is above in status, present in the sanctuary. The dead are below. The old foundations lie below. The first version of the shrine lies below. Everything important has layers. A temple floor is a boundary, and boundaries invite stories. What if the old powers are still there? What if the first builders made promises now forgotten? What if a city's prosperity depends on offerings made to beings no official hymn names anymore? The questions are speculative. They're also natural. A child raised near such places would learn that the ground beneath the temple is different from ordinary ground. Adults lower their voices there. Workers dig carefully. Priests watch closely. Old bricks are treated with respect. That atmosphere alone can preserve a memory of hidden forces. The lamp begins to fail. Its light turns amber. You climb back toward the sanctuary where the air is warmer and touched by incense. The priest has gone. The floor looks ordinary again, a surface for worshippers, processions, and quiet maintenance. Yet you cannot unfeel what lies beneath it. Every step now has depth. The voices beneath temple floors are not literal voices. Perhaps they are deposits, earlier walls, buried offerings, foundation inscriptions, and ritual gestures. They are the material remains of a culture that believes sacred order must be anchored below as much as praised above. And in that belief, you sense another trace of the age before the known gods became fully arranged. The older sacred world did not vanish into dust. It was sealed under brick, placed in jars, pressed into corners, and covered respectfully by newer worship. The temple sleeps. The buried things remain. You stand at the doorway as dawn begins to pale the eastern sky. The city stirs. Sandals scrape stone. A woman carries water past the courtyard. Somewhere, a door hinge squeaks with the undignified honesty of daily life. Above the floor, civilization wakes. Below it, memory keeps still. The sky in the old story is not peaceful. It is crowded, restless, and tense with voices no human ear is meant to hear. You stand beneath it in imagination, while the clouds gather like dark wool over a plain of wet earth. The wind smells of rain, smoke, and metal. Although no forge burns nearby, something above is arguing, not loudly, not like thunder at first, but in the deep pressure that comes before thunder. A heaviness settles over the land. Birds vanish into reeds. Dogs refuse to leave doorways. Even the river seems to lower its voice, as if listening for a verdict. Ancient Mesopotamian myths often describe conflict among divine or primordial powers before stable order emerges. Scholars at Chicago, Oxford, and Yale have long examined these stories as sacred explanations for cosmic structure, political authority, and the uneasy victory of order over chaos. Creation is not always gentle in these traditions. Sometimes the world is arranged after struggle. That struggle matters. It suggests that order was remembered not as natural but as one. The present world stands because something older was subdued, divided, displaced, or given a boundary. The peaceful temple courtyard rests upon a mythic battlefield, which is a rather dramatic foundation for morning offerings. You feel the first rain begin. It dots the dust. The forgotten war in heaven is not one neat battle with a single surviving script. It is a pattern of stories where older forces resist arrangement. Waters rise against separation. Storm powers challenge established rule. Younger gods inherit, confront, or replace ancient beings whose names sound older than cities. Here, divine history resembles human history. Power changes hands. Someone claims legitimacy. Someone else is described as dangerous. A mainstream historical fact stands clearly within this shadow. Mesopotamian creation literature, especially traditions known from Babylonian texts, presents divine conflict as part of the ordering of the cosmos. Researchers from major universities have interpreted these tales in relation to kingship, temple ritual, and the rise of particular city gods within changing political worlds. Myth can remember politics. Politics can borrow myth. A city rises, and its god becomes greater. A dynasty triumphs, and older divine arrangements are retold. Sacred genealogy shifts like a family tree edited by someone with military support. Ancient theology had its own polite forms of revision, and some of them were carved into permanent-looking clay. The fringe tidbit appears where broken names vanish from the record. Some alternative readers imagine a true celestial war before the Anunnaki, a conflict between forgotten races of gods whose defeat was later hidden in myth. Scholars generally see these fragments as literary, ritual, and theological developments across centuries, yet the emotional trace of replacement remains real. Older powers fall silent. Newer powers speak louder. You stand now inside a storm dream. Above you, the sky opens in layers. There are waters above, waters below, and a middle space where humans breathe uncertainly. The old beings belong to the depths, the first darkness, the unmeasured sea, the womb before shape. The younger powers bring names, borders, decrees, and the clean arrogance of administration. Order is useful. Order is also violent. To make a world, one must divide. Land from water, day from night, sacred from ordinary, ruler from ruled, human from animal, living from dead. Each division makes life possible, but each one also wounds the seamless dark that came before. Perhaps that is why primordial beings in myth often feel tragic. They are not simply villains. They are what existed before arrangement. They are the old vastness, too wide for fields, laws, and tax records. Naturally, civilization finds them alarming. Civilization prefers measurements. The storm grows closer. Thunder rolls across the plain, not explosive, but slow and immense. It feels like furniture being moved in heaven by beings with poor consideration for those below. The rain thickens, mud begins to form around your feet. Among scholars, debate continues over whether divine conflict myths primarily reflect natural forces, political change, ritual drama, or deep psychological patterns in human culture. Researchers at Harvard and Cambridge have explored these layers without reducing the stories to one explanation. The debate remains open because ancient myth is rarely single-purpose. It works like a river delta, many channels. One tale can describe seasonal flooding, royal ideology, temple supremacy, cosmic birth, and human anxiety at once. That is why it survives. A simple story dies when its answer is exhausted. A layered story keeps breathing. You listen to the rain on reeds and imagine priests reciting old conflict myths during sacred festivals. Their voices rise in measured cadence. The listeners know the outcome, yet still feel the danger. The world must be ordered again through speech, performance, and memory. Creation is repeated in ceremony. The old war is never entirely over. This is the unsettling part. If order must be ritually renewed, then chaos remains nearby. It has not been destroyed. It has only been given a place, a boundary, a name, a season. Beneath the floors, beyond the city walls, under the waters, above the storm clouds. The older powers continue pressing against the edges. You can sense their pressure in every myth of rebellion. A god refuses a decree. A monster rises from the deep. A storm interrupts the king's confidence. A flood washes away human plans. These are not random episodes. They express the fragile nature of the constructed world. Cities may boast, but mud brick dissolves. Kings may command, but drought ignores grammar. Priests may calculate, but heaven occasionally behaves with suspicious independence. The forgotten war in heaven may therefore be a memory of structure itself being contested, not a literal war with weapons of bronze among clouds, but a sacred explanation for why reality feels unstable. Humans know that order exists. They also know it fails. So they tell of powers before order. They tell of conflict. They tell of victory, but never with complete ease. The rain begins to soften. Water runs through narrow channels in the ground. Frogs call from the marsh, aggressively pleased with themselves. The sky lightens a little, and the storm moves eastward, leaving the world washed and uncertain. You look at the horizon. The clouds are breaking. In the distance, a settlement resumes its noises. Doors open. Fires are coaxed back to life. Someone inspects damage to a roof. Someone mutters that the gods have opinions, which seems difficult to refute after such weather. The mythic war above becomes ordinary work below. Humans repair what the heavens disturb. They rebuild walls, clean channels, dry grain, comfort children, and restore routines. In doing so, they imitate the gods of order, not grandly, but through maintenance. That may be humanity's quiet role in the story. Not hero, not master, caretaker of temporary order. The lost age before the known divine courts may be hidden in these conflict memories. It appears as a time when the world was not yet settled, when names had not fixed powers into offices, when raw forces moved without polite boundaries. Later gods inherit that wild material and organize it into a cosmos humans can survive. Yet something is lost in every organization. The old dark becomes an enemy. The first waters become a problem. The primordial mother becomes a defeated figure. The boundless world becomes a threat so that the measured world can feel blessed. You stand in the damp field as the last thunder fades. The air now smells of soaked clay and crushed reeds. A thin band of gold appears near the edge of the sky. It is beautiful, but beauty does not erase what passed through. The war in heaven leaves no sword in your hand. It leaves a feeling. The feeling that beneath every peaceful myth lies a struggle over memory, which powers are honoured, which are feared, which are renamed, which are pushed backward into the time before time. And perhaps those older powers, unnamed or half-named, are what remain of the age hidden beneath Sumerian memory, not gone, not victorious, not explained, only present as pressure, like thunder beyond the horizon, reminding you that the ordered world was never the first world. It was the world that survived being made. You stand beside a canal at first light, where the water moves with the colour of dull copper. Men and women are already working along the banks. Their feet sink into mud. Their hands grip baskets, hose, ropes, and reed bundles. The air smells of wet earth, sweat, barley chaff, and smoke from breakfast fires rising behind the houses. No one looks mythical here. Everyone looks tired. And yet, in the oldest stories, this tiredness becomes one of humanity's first clues. Why were humans shaped? Why were they placed into a world already heavy with tasks? Why does creation so often lead not to leisure, but to labour? Mesopotamian myths sometimes describe humans as created to perform work once carried by divine beings. Scholars at Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have studied these traditions as reflections of temple economies, labour organisation, and theological imagination. The stories do not flatter humanity too much, which is rather rude, but also revealing. You listen to the canal bank. Water slaps softly against mud. A worker lifts a basket filled with clay and silt, then passes it to another. The movement repeats until it becomes almost ceremonial. Lift, carry, empty, return. The canal must stay open, or fields suffer. Fields must produce grain, or storehouses empty. Storehouses must be filled, or temples and households tremble. Labour holds the world together. That is the plain fact beneath the sacred story. Cities depend on coordinated work. Irrigation systems require planning, repair, measurement, and discipline. Research from major universities has confirmed that southern Mesopotamian urban life relied on complex agricultural management, craft production, and distribution networks. Civilization was built not only by kings, but by aching backs. Very glamorous. Very true. The mythic version turns the social reality into cosmic explanation. Humans are formed from clay, breath, blood, divine intention, or some mingling of earth and sacred substance. They are not made outside the system. They are made from the same world they must maintain. That detail is important. Clay is not noble in the way gold is noble. It is common, sticky, useful, everywhere beneath the feet. It becomes brick, tablet, bowl, seal, figurine, and body. To say humans are clay is not only to humble them, it is to connect them to the material of civilization itself. You touch the damp canal wall, it cools your palm. The old stories understand that humanity belongs between the divine and the mud. People serve the gods with offerings, songs, buildings, and rituals. They also serve the fields with digging, planting, harvesting, carrying, and counting. Their role is both sacred and exhausting. Perhaps that is why humans complain in myth. One can sympathise. The quirky tidbit appears in modern fringe readings of creation texts. Some interpreters claim that human beings were engineered by ancient powers specifically as a labour force, turning sacred myth into a literal account of genetic design. Mainstream scholars do not accept that interpretation as historical evidence, but they recognise that the myths express a deep ancient concern with labour, hierarchy, and obligation. The idea persists because it touches something recognisable. People still ask who benefits from human work. They ask who designed the system, who maintains it, who eats from it, and who carries the burden when the grand words fade. Ancient myth places those questions at the beginning of humanity itself, where no one can pretend they are merely modern complaints. A woman near the canal straightens her back. For a moment, she looks toward the temple rising beyond the fields. It catches the early light, pale and solemn. Its platform depends on her labour as surely as the crop does. The gods receive offerings because people harvest grain. Priests perform rituals because others grind flour, weave cloth, bake bread, and clean courtyards. Creation continues through maintenance. Not dramatic maintenance, daily maintenance. Among scholars, debate continues over whether Mesopotamian creation myths primarily justify social hierarchy or preserve older reflections on humanity's fragile place in the cosmos. Researchers at Harvard, Cambridge, and Pennsylvania have approached the issue through literature, archaeology, and economic records. The evidence suggests both possibilities can live inside the same story. A myth can comfort and control. It can dignify labour by making it sacred. It can also make labour difficult to question by placing it under divine order. That is the clever danger of sacred systems. They can wrap necessity in meaning, and meaning can be both medicine and chain. You walk from the canal toward the clay pits. Here, workers cut earth for bricks. The ground is scarred with shallow pools and rectangular cuts. Bare feet slide in mud. Hands shape clay into moulds, smoothing the surface with quick, practiced gestures. The bricks will dry under the sun, then become walls, temples, ovens, storage rooms, and perhaps a palace for someone who will not personally carry many bricks. A familiar arrangement. The clay body and the clay city mirror one another. Human-shaped bricks, and stories say powers shaped humans. Humans build temples, and temples tell humans why they exist. The maker and the made keep changing places. That circle is quietly unsettling. If humanity was shaped to serve, then service is not an accident. It is built into the origin. Yet the stories also suggest that humans relieve divine burden, which gives them importance. The gods need offerings. The temples need caretakers. The world needs hands. The humble worker becomes necessary to heaven. That is no small dignity. You hear the city waking fully now. Donkeys bray. Bakers slap dough against oven walls. Children run where they should not. A scribe unrolls his tools with tragic seriousness, preparing to make someone's grain problem permanent in writing. Above the bustle, smoke rises in thin columns. Every column is labour made visible. The hidden timeline reveals humanity's role not as a single answer, but as a tension. Humans are servants, makers, memory carriers, and witnesses. They feed the gods, but also preserve the gods in story. They are created for work, but through work they create civilization. They are small, but without them the sacred order has no hands. Perhaps that is the secret. The gods may decree, but humans perform. The divine may imagine, but humans repair. The cosmic plan, if there is one, depends on people noticing leaks in canals before everything becomes an embarrassing swamp. That is strangely comforting. It means the grand structure of existence rests partly on ordinary attention. A breeze moves across the fields, carrying the green smell of barley. The canal shines brighter now, no longer copper but silver in the rising sun. Workers continue their rhythm. Their bodies bend and rise like a slow chant. You realise that myths about human creation are not merely about the beginning of life. They are about the burden of staying alive inside a system larger than any single person. They ask why effort never ends, why order must always be renewed, why rest feels borrowed. The tablets answer with divine necessity. The fields answer with hunger. The body answers with fatigue. And somewhere between those answers, humanity stands. Not as an accident of dust, not as the master of all things, rather as the creature shaped from earth to tend earth, shaped from memory to carry memory, shaped from need to understand need. The canal water keeps moving. It does not explain itself. You watch the workers until their forms blur in heat. The temple remains beyond them, dignified and demanding. The city behind them grows louder. The sky above them widens into blue. Why was humanity shaped? Perhaps to serve, perhaps to remember, perhaps to maintain a world that was never fully finished, perhaps to ask the question again each morning, while lifting clay from water and building with tired hands, a little more order against the dark. The moon rises over the ziggurat like a pale bowl lifted from the dark. You stand in an empty courtyard where the bricks still hold a little heat from the day. The air smells of dust, old straw, and cooling plaster. Somewhere beyond the temple wall, a dog barks once, then seems to regret the effort. The great tower is silent. Its stairways climb into silver light, but no procession moves there now. No drums sound. No priest carries offerings toward the high shrine. The building remains, massive and patient, while the city around it thins into shadow. Ancient Mesopotamian cities rose and declined across many centuries, shaped by shifting rivers, warfare, trade, climate, and political change. Archaeologists from institutions such as Chicago, Pennsylvania, and Oxford have shown that urban centres could flourish, shrink, and be rebuilt repeatedly. No city was as permanent as its hymns like to suggest. That is the quiet lesson of ruins. They outlive confidence. You walk across the courtyard and fine dust lifts around your feet. A broken bowl lies near a wall. A fallen brick bears the faint impression of fingers from the person who shaped it. That small mark feels more alive than the tower itself. The ziggurat was never only architecture. It was a mountain made by human hands, a platform between earth and sky. It declared that the city had a centre, that heaven could be approached, that sacred order could be stacked brick by brick, and yet here it stands abandoned. The moon makes everything gentle, which is rather unfair to collapse. Under daylight, ruin looks harsh. Under moonlight, it begins to look intentional, as if the gods simply stepped away for a quiet evening and forgot to return. A mainstream historical fact rests in the bricks. Ziggurats belong to major temple complexes, and their construction required organised labour, planning, and sustained economic resources. Research from major universities confirms that these monuments reflected both religious devotion and political power. They were faith made visible. They were also administration with stairs. The quirky tidbit comes from later legends that imagine ruined towers as places where heavenly beings once descended, or where human pride reached too high. Some fringe interpretations turn ziggurats into ancient landing platforms or devices for cosmic contact. Scholars see them as sacred architecture rooted in Mesopotamian religious practice. But the upward shape naturally invites speculation. Humans see stairs and imagine arrival. You pause at the base of the tower. The bricks are rough beneath your hand. The moonlight pools in cracks where plants have taken root. Little green blades push through ancient labour, quietly disrespectful in the way nature often is. Empires may fall, but weeds maintain a vigorous foreign policy. The empty ziggurat becomes a symbol of cycles. A city gathers wealth, builds upward, praises its god, records its victories, and teaches children that its order is secure. Then rivers shift, trade weakens, enemies arrive, fields salt over, officials mismanage something because officials have a long and distinguished history of that. Slowly the centre loosens. People leave. The tower remains. Among scholars, debate continues over how environmental change contributed to Mesopotamian urban decline in different periods. Researchers at Yale, Cambridge, and Columbia have explored drought, river movement, soil salinity, and social stress without reducing every collapse to one cause. The evidence suggests layered pressures rather than one tidy disaster. Civilizations rarely fall from one blow. They fray. You imagine the last evening before abandonment became obvious. A priest still lights a lamp. A family still bakes bread. A scribe still records grain owed to a storehouse that may not receive it. No one says the age is ending, because endings rarely introduce themselves politely. They arrive as shortages. They arrive as silence. A festival is smaller this year. A canal is repaired late. A shrine receives fewer offerings. A road becomes unsafe. A district empties. People say it is temporary, then teach their children new routes away from the city. The moon watches all of it. The ziggurat carries the memory of repeated rise and loss. It is not the first sacred structure on earth, and it will not be the last abandoned one. Beneath its monumentality lies an older human rhythm. Build, gather, praise, fail, remember, rebuild somewhere else. This rhythm may be one reason ancient traditions imagine time as layered ages. People did not need modern archaeology to know that earlier worlds had vanished. They walked past old mounds, they dug up strange bricks, they found graves beneath fields. The land itself testified that others had lived, ordered, worshipped, and disappeared. You look from the tower to the horizon, mounds darken under moonlight. Each one could be a city sleeping under its own dust. Each one could hold broken tablets, hearths, bones, beads, seals, and the vanished sound of market streets. The world is full of buried confidence. Perhaps the lost age was remembered because ruins were everywhere. Not in one place, everywhere. A shepherd resting near an old mound might hear stories of giants who built it. A child finding a carved stone might be told it belonged to people before the flood. A farmer uncovering a brick with strange signs might decide the old ones knew secrets no living person could read. This is how archaeology begins before archaeologists. It begins as wonder. The moon over empty ziggurats softens the line between evidence and dream. The ruin is real. The stories around it may swell beyond proof. Yet even exaggerated tales preserve a fact of feeling. People knew they were not the first. That knowledge humbles a civilization. It also frightens it. If others rose and vanished, then perhaps your city can vanish too. If older gods were forgotten, perhaps your god needs daily care. If ancient towers became homes for owls, perhaps your own monument is less eternal than the dedication inscription politely claims. The ziggurat offers no comfort, only perspective. You climb a little way up the stair. The night air grows cooler. From above, the courtyard looks like a faded plan drawn in silver lines. Beyond it, canals reflect the moon in broken strips. Houses sit dark and roofless where families once slept. A ziggurat is meant to connect worlds, yet abandonment changes its meaning. It no longer joins an active city to heaven. It joins memory to absence. It becomes a ladder no one climbs, leading toward a shrine no one tends. That image is quiet enough for sleep, and unsettling enough to remain. The hidden cycle becomes visible in the empty tower. Sacred order depends on human maintenance, and human maintenance depends on water, food, peace, labour, trust, and time. When those supports weaken, even the house of a god can lose its voice. Perhaps the divine does not vanish. Perhaps the humans do. The moon crosses higher. Shadows shorten along the steps. A night bird lands on a broken parapet, turns its head, and studies you with unnecessary judgment. Somewhere below, the wind moves dust through a doorway where offerings were once prepared. You feel the age of the place, not as a number, as repetition, other courtyards, other towers, other sacred centres under other moons, some built of stone, some of mud brick, some only memory. Humanity keeps making centres, because without a centre the world feels too wide. Then the centre fails, and people carry pieces of it into the next story. That may be what came before the famous divine order, not one vanished civilization, but a succession of centres, each believing itself final, each becoming a layer. The Anunnaki inherit a world already familiar with rise and ruin. Their memory stands among older abandoned shrines. You descend slowly. The bricks cool under your soles. At the base of the ziggurat, the courtyard is almost fully dark. The tower no longer seems empty. It seems filled with all the voices it has lost. Workers, singers, priests, children, guards, widows, officials, bakers, strangers, all dissolved into a silence that still has shape. The moon gives the ruin back to itself, and you understand that civilizations do not disappear all at once. They become quieter. Their gods receive fewer songs. Their streets fill with sand. Their towers stand under moonlight, waiting for later minds to ask what cycle they belong to, and whether the cycle has truly ended. The story changes its clothing when it crosses a border. You hear it first beside a river, then again near a mountain, then later beside a dark sea where waves drag shells across the shore. The names are different. The gods are different. The language has changed. Yet the shape inside the tale remains strangely familiar. A flood comes. A warning arrives. a chosen survivor remembers. You sit near a small fire while night spreads across the land. The air smells of salt, damp wool, and crushed time underfoot. Someone speaks in a low voice, telling of ancient waters that once rose beyond all expectation. No one interrupts. Even children understand when a story carries the weight of warning. Flood traditions appear across many ancient cultures, including Mesopotamia, Anatolia, the Levant, Greece, and South Asia. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and Harvard have studied these stories as evidence of shared themes: cultural contact, local disasters, and the deep human memory of living near dangerous waters. The fact is simple: water remembers loudly. In Mesopotamian tradition, flood stories carry especially ancient force. They do not merely describe rain, they describe a rupture in the order of existence. Human noise, divine anger, sacred counsel, survival, sacrifice, and renewal gather into one slow, terrifying image: a boat on dark water, a world beneath it. The fringe tidbit appears when modern writers compare flood myths and suggest they preserve a single global catastrophe from a lost age. Mainstream scholars are more cautious, pointing to regional floods, cultural transmission, and the universal vulnerability of river civilizations. Yet the repeated pattern does make the imagination pause. Why do so many peoples remember waters rising? Perhaps because water rises everywhere humans build too close to it, which is a deeply human habit. We admire a river, settle beside it, depend on it, and then act surprised when it behaves like a river. Still, myth does more than report. It transforms. You follow the echo into another story. Giant beings walking before ordinary humans, ancestors with impossible lifespans, heroes born at the edge of divine and human worlds. These figures appear in different forms across ancient traditions. They may represent memory of powerful chiefs, mythic exaggeration, social outsiders, or the unsettling feeling that the earlier world was larger. Ancient people often placed greatness behind them. The past was taller. The first kings reigned longer. The first teachers knew more. The first cities were closer to heaven. The first beings spoke with gods more easily. Such ideas do not need literal giants to matter. They express a sense that humanity has descended from an age of strange nearness. The old world was intimate with mystery. The present is only trying to keep up. A mainstream historical fact supports part of this pattern. Ancient king lists and heroic traditions often magnified early rulers through immense lifespans, semi-divine ancestry, and legendary deeds. Researchers from Chicago and Cambridge have shown how such traditions helped link political authority with sacred antiquity. A ruler with ancient ancestors looks sturdier, at least on clay. You picture a scribe copying an old tale by lamplight. The room smells of oil, dust, and warm reed. He writes of a hero whose strength exceeds ordinary measure, whose journey reaches distant forests, whose grief becomes wisdom. The tale is not only entertainment, it teaches what humans are, by showing someone almost more than human. That boundary matters. Too divine, and he is no longer like you. Too human, and he cannot carry the old awe. The open scholarly debate remains alive around these parallels. Some researchers argue that shared mythic motifs spread through trade, migration, and storytelling networks. Others emphasize that similar human conditions create similar stories independently. Both views have strength, and the surviving evidence rarely behaves like a cooperative witness. Stories travel, so do fears. You hear another echo now. Impossible timelines. Ancient chronologies often stretch backward into vast reigns, earlier ages, and sacred beginnings beyond normal reckoning. These timelines do not match modern history, but they reveal how cultures use deep time to express authority, memory, and cosmic order. Long ago was not merely long ago, it was another quality of existence. In such timelines, the age before ordinary history becomes a protected chamber. Events there can be larger, stranger, and more meaningful. Floods can cleanse the world, giants can walk, teachers can emerge from hidden waters, Gods can speak directly. Humanity can be shaped, judged, and given its first tasks. This is where echoes become a system. Different traditions preserve different fragments. A flood, a first garden, a tower, a sky battle, a sacred mountain, a lost city beneath water, a time when humans and divine beings met more openly. None of these alone proves a vanished empire. Together, they show that human memory repeatedly imagines an earlier world behind the visible one. You lean closer to the fire, the flames bend in the wind, the storyteller's face appears and disappears in orange light. Behind the voice, you hear waves, river currents, storm rain, and the scrape of boats on mud. You hear generations compressing disaster into tale, then tale into sacred memory. A quirky detail appears in old comparisons of distant myths. Some cultures describe survivors sending birds to test whether floodwaters have receded. Scholars often explain these parallels through transmission among neighbouring traditions, especially in the ancient Near East. Still, the image of a bird leaving the boat and searching for land remains beautifully practical. Even myth needs logistics. The bird becomes a messenger between fear and safety. It flies where humans cannot yet go. It returns, or does not. In that small motion, hope becomes visible. Ancient storytellers understood suspense very well. The sneaky professionals. You consider how stories move across trade routes. Merchants carry copper, wool, lapis, grain, timber, and gossip, which is probably the most durable trade good. A sailor hears a flood tale in one port and repeats it in another. A captive carries a myth into exile. A priest adapts an old story to a new god. Memory is exchanged with goods. It changes hands. It changes accents. It survives. The lost age hidden in these echoes may therefore be partly a network of memories, not one sealed doctrine. People across regions experienced floods, migrations, climate stress, social collapse, and rebuilding. They told stories to make such experiences bearable. Those stories touched, borrowed, merged, and grew, yet some images remained stubborn. Water covering the old world, a survivor guarding knowledge, beings greater than present humans, a warning ignored, a renewed order after devastation. These images persist because they speak to something deep in human life. We know that the world can end locally. A village can end. A family line can end. A language can end. A city can become a mound. To the people inside that loss, it is not local. It is everything. Myth respects that feeling. Modern history often corrects it. Both are needed. As the fire lowers, the storyteller falls silent. The listeners do not clap, because this is not a performance in that way. They sit with the tale as one sits with weather. It has passed through them, leaving a chill. Above her the stars appear between clouds. They look indifferent, and perhaps that indifference is why stories matter. They give the sky a memory. They make rivers accountable. They give disaster a beginning, a warning, a survivor, and a reason to continue. You sense now that echoes preserved in myth are not simple copies of one lost text. They are like reeds in a marsh, each separate yet moving under the same wind. Floods, giants, long rains, sacred teachers, and impossible ages all bend toward the same hidden intuition. There was a before, it was not empty. It was dangerous, powerful, and partly forgotten. And in the soft crackle of the fire, while waves breathe in the dark beyond sight, you feel those distant cultures speaking across time, not with one voice, but with many voices repeating the same uneasy truth in different names. Something was lost. Something survived. The archive is entered by a stair that seems to lower you out of ordinary time. Each step is narrow and worn in the middle, polished by feet whose owners have been dust for thousands of years. The air grows cooler as you descend. It smells of clay, smoke, mouse droppings, and the dry sweetness of reed stacked long ago. At the bottom, darkness waits with shelves inside it. You lift a lamp. Rows of tablets appear in the weak light, some whole, some broken, some fused by ancient fire into hard black lumps. Their edges cast small shadows on the walls. They look less like books than fragments of a collapsed mind, each one holding a little order against oblivion. Ancient Mesopotamian archives preserved contracts, omens, hymns, letters, school exercises, rituals, accounts, myths, and royal inscriptions. Scholars at Chicago, Pennsylvania, Oxford, and Yale have shown that scribal culture formed one of the most powerful engines of memory in the ancient world. Writing changed forgetting. It did not defeat it. That is the quiet sorrow of the archive. A tablet can survive a palace fire, yet lose the line that matters most. A library can hold thousands of records, yet preserve only one side of a lost argument. A scribe can copy a text carefully, while misunderstanding a word already ancient in his own day. The hidden library beneath darkness is never complete. It is a ruin of remembering. You pass a shelf where tablets lie sorted by topic. Omens from the sky, omens from animals, rituals against illness, lists of plants, lists of stones, lists of gods. Humanity has always loved lists, perhaps because chaos looks briefly embarrassed when placed in columns. A mainstream historical fact settles into the lamplight. Major ancient collections, including the famous library associated with Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, preserved older Mesopotamian texts through copying. Although later than early Sumer, such collections carried traditions whose roots reached far deeper into southern temple scholarship. Without copying, many myths would vanish. With copying, they changed. A tablet copied in one city might preserve a phrase from another. A god's name might be replaced. A local tradition might be adjusted to fit a wider theology. A missing section might be supplied by memory, guesswork, or that confident human habit of fixing things one does not fully understand. This is how archives breathe. Not mechanically. Organically, you touch one tablet only with your eyes. It contains a damaged myth, its opening lines missing. The preserved portion begins in the middle of divine action, as if the beginning has been stolen. Ancient texts often do this to modern readers. They invite you into a room where the first half of the conversation is already over. Very inconsiderate. The quirky tidbit comes from the missing tablets themselves. Some fringe writers imagine destroyed archives containing forbidden accounts of a pre-Anunnaki age, hidden knowledge removed by priests or conquerors. Scholars are more cautious, pointing to war, decay, recycling, accidental loss, and the uneven survival of clay. Still, deliberate destruction did happen in ancient conflicts, and power has always had an opinion about records. Archives are not innocent. They are curated. Someone decides what is copied, stored, taught, buried, ignored, or scraped away. A temple may preserve hymns that honour its god, while neglecting traditions that weaken its authority. A king may collect ancient wisdom to display legitimacy. A conquering army may burn records because memory can be dangerous. You stand among shelves and feel that danger. Words can threaten power, not always by rebellion, sometimes simply by remembering an older arrangement, an earlier god, a different origin, or a world where present claims seem less eternal. To remember too much can make authority look temporary, which authority rarely appreciates. Among scholars, debate continues over how much ancient textual loss resulted from accident and how much from intentional selection. Researchers at Harvard, Cambridge, and major museums have explored scribal transmission, archive formation, and cultural memory. The evidence reveals both preservation and silence, both care and disappearance. The archive contains absences. You notice them like missing teeth. A divine list breaks where an older name might have stood. A ritual mentions an ancient formula no longer explained. A hymn praises a god for conquering powers whose identities are reduced to shadows. A school tablet preserves an exercise whose source text is gone. These are not proofs of conspiracy. They are invitations to humility. The past is not a locked chest with one key. It is a burned house in which some rooms survived because rain came from the right direction. What remains may be precious, but it is not the whole dwelling. You move deeper into the archive. The lamp flickers. On one shelf, tablets have slumped together from heat. Their signs are half melted, as if language itself softened in fire. The destruction that preserved them also wounded them. This is one of history's darker jokes, and it tells it very slowly. Fire can destroy parchment and papyrus. Fire can bake clay into survival. So disaster becomes archivist, collapse becomes conservation. A burning palace, meant to end a world, gives that world a longer afterlife. Ancient memory survives because someone failed to keep the building safe, which is not exactly comforting. You sit beside a low table where a scribe once worked. A reed stylus lies imagined near the edge. Clay dust gathers in shallow bowls. The room feels quiet enough to hear the movement of thought. The scribe selects an older tablet. He copies carefully. Perhaps he knows the text is ancient. Perhaps he feels pride in preserving it. Perhaps he is only fulfilling an assignment and wondering when he may eat. Human motives rarely arrive pure, even in sacred rooms. Still, his copy matters. Through his ordinary labour, a forgotten myth crosses one more generation. A name survives. A pattern remains. A strange phrase reaches a future reader who will never know his face. The hidden library is built from such small obediences, but is also shaped by what no one copies. A text too obscure, too local, too damaged, too dangerous, or too unfashionable may vanish. A tradition preserved only in speech may die with one generation. A shrine destroyed in war may take its unique stories into silence. The darkness between tablets grows wider. You begin to understand that the lost age may not be hidden because someone perfectly concealed it. It may be hidden because memory is naturally fragile, and because every surviving culture edits the past by surviving. Those who endure tell the story. Those who vanish become atmosphere. The atmosphere can be powerful. A missing archive can haunt a complete one. A broken line can make the known god seem surrounded by older shadows. A name preserved without explanation can feel like a doorway that opens only inward. The lamp burns lower now. The archive walls seem closer. You hear, or imagine you hear, the scrape of styluses from rooms long gone. Students repeating signs, teachers correcting mistakes, priests selecting ritual texts, officials counting grain, kings demanding copies of ancient wisdom, because even rulers enjoy borrowing age when their own authority feels young. Writing gathers all these voices, then loses most of them. What remains is uneven, partial, and magnificent. You rise and look once more at the shelves. The tablets do not reveal a complete lost age. They reveal that ancient people themselves inherited older fragments, organized them, revised them, feared them, and sometimes buried them beneath newer systems. The library beneath darkness is not a single secret room. It is the condition of history itself, a place where memory survives in shards, where silence speaks through gaps, where destruction preserves what peace might have allowed to decay. You leave slowly, carrying not an answer, but a colder awareness. There are missing shelves in the human story. There are lost tablets beneath unexcavated mounds. There are names once spoken in temple rooms that no mouth now knows how to shape. And in that darkness, the age before the famous gods does not stand revealed. It waits as absence, as pressure, as the faint outline of a larger memory that ancient scribes touched, copied, altered, and sometimes lost before it could ever reach you whole. The oldest storyteller does not sit on a throne. He sits near a doorway where evening light falls across his hands and turns his skin the colour of old clay. His voice is thin now, but the room becomes still when he begins. Even the children stop pretending not to listen. Outside, the wind moves dust along the lane. Inside, memory gathers. You sit among the listeners, close enough to smell lamp oil, wool, dried figs, and the faint bitterness of herbs hanging from the roof beams. The storyteller does not read from a tablet. His archive is breath, rhythm, pause, and repetition. Every sentence travels through the body before it enters the air. He speaks of the first people. He speaks of waters before fields. He speaks of a warning given when the sky was dark and the animals restless. He speaks slowly, not because he has forgotten, but because some memories must be approached like sleeping dogs, carefully, with respect. Mainstream research confirms that oral tradition shaped ancient memory long before writing preserved formal texts. Scholars at Harvard, Yale, and Oxford have studied how stories can carry social values, warnings, genealogies, and sacred patterns across generations. Oral memory changes, but change is not the same as emptiness. It adapts to survive. The old storyteller knows this without needing a university to inform him, which he would probably find intrusive. He repeats key phrases so the young can remember them. He uses images that cling to the mind: black water, bright bird, sealed door, crooked star, silent mound. These are memory hooks. They catch. The quirky tidbit lies in ceremonial fragments that seem to preserve older phrases long after their original meanings fade. In many cultures, rituals keep archaic words because sound itself becomes sacred. Some fringe writers imagine these fragments as pieces of a lost language from before civilization. Scholars usually see them as conservative ritual speech, yet their strangeness is real. A word can outlive its meaning. That is haunting. You hear the storyteller utter a phrase nobody explains. The listeners bow their heads anyway. Perhaps it once named a river spirit, perhaps an ancestor, perhaps a vanished rite. Now it survives because the ceremony demands it, and because no one wants to be the person who edits the ancient warning incorrectly. Quite sensible. Among scholars, debate continues over how much ancient myth preserves historical memory, and how much it reshapes human experience into sacred pattern. Researchers at Cambridge and Chicago and Pennsylvania have approached the question through archaeology, linguistics, and comparative literature. The answer remains careful and unsettled, because memory is neither pure record nor pure invention. It is a living vessel, a cracked one, perhaps, but still carrying water. The last memory of the ancients may have survived in such vessels. A procession song, a burial formula, a harvest chant, a child's riddle, a taboo spoken at wells, a story told only when storms gather. Each fragment holds a little of the forgotten world, not as a map, but as scent carried on cloth. You imagine a ceremony before dawn. People stand near a mound where ancestors are buried. The ground is cold. A bowl of water rests beside a small offering of grain. Someone lights a wick, and the flame leans blue before becoming gold. The leader speaks words received from older mouths. No one fully understands them. Everyone knows they matter. This is how deep time enters ordinary life. Not through grand revelation, but through repeated gestures. Pour the water, touch the threshold, name the dead, face the east. Leave the first portion aside. Do not speak loudly near the old mound. The rules become simple. Their origins vanish. Yet vanished origins can grow more powerful. When a custom no longer remembers its first reason, it may become sacred simply because it is old. Age itself becomes authority. The dead do not need to explain. They only need to remain dead long enough for disagreement to feel impolite. The storyteller smiles at his own line, perhaps aware that ancestors are excellent at winning arguments. His listeners relax. Then his voice lowers again. He tells of beings who came before the present order, not clearly not with names you can fix. They are described as tall, or bright, or deep, or hidden. Depending on the version, they teach, demand, depart, and sometimes sleep beneath the world. They are less characters than pressures. The younger listeners imagine faces. The older listeners hear warnings. A mainstream historical fact stands beneath the scene. Mesopotamian culture preserved tradition through both written and oral channels, and temple rituals likely maintained ancient formulas whose origins reached beyond surviving manuscripts. Major research organizations have emphasized that literacy in ancient society was limited, so spoken performance remained essential. Clay preserved some things, voices preserved others. The danger, of course, is that voices die. A plague takes elders, war scatters families, a city empties, children grow up in another language, a sacred chant becomes nonsense, then silence. Every oral tradition is a candle carried through weather. You feel that fragility in the room. The storyteller coughs. A young woman finishes his line softly, helping without interrupting. He nods. The transmission continues. It is humble, almost invisible, but it may matter more than monuments. A tower can fall, a sentence can travel. In the hidden timeline, the oldest storytellers become bridges between worlds. They stand between event and myth, between trauma and ritual, between forgotten teachers and later gods. They do not preserve history perfectly. They preserve what communities need in order to remain themselves. Need edits memory. Fear edits memory. Love edits memory too. You listen as the tale shifts toward warning. There was a time, he says, when people forgot the old measures. They neglected the offerings. They ignored the signs in water and sky. Then the boundary weakened, and the world nearly returned to what it had been before order. The room grows still. A coal breaks in the hearth. That tiny sound seems enormous. Perhaps this is the final warning hidden in Sumerian memory. Not simply that older beings existed, but that order is conditional. It must be tended through knowledge, ritual, justice, labour, and remembrance. Forgetting is not neutral, it is dangerous. The storyteller's hands move in the lamplight. They are thin, but when he gestures, the unseen world seems to arrange itself around him. He's not inventing entertainment. He is repairing a fragile bridge. Each listener becomes responsible. That responsibility is quiet. No thunder follows. No god appears at the doorway to confirm the message, which is frankly typical of gods in stories about responsibility. Instead, the listeners receive the tale and carry it into sleep. Work, childbirth, mourning, and the next season's fears. You step outside when the story ends. Night has settled over the settlement. The sky is clear, and the stars look cold enough to ring if struck. In the distance, a mound rises against the horizon, dark and rounded like the back of a sleeping animal. You understand why people kept telling these stories, not to solve the past, to remain connected to it. The last memory of the ancients is not one perfect revelation. It is a trembling chain of voices, ceremonies, fragments, and warnings. It survives in the old man's breath, in the young woman's remembered line, in the silent bow before words nobody translates. And as the lamp inside the house dims, you feel that the forgotten age has come closer, not as a kingdom returned from dust, but as a whisper passed carefully from mouth to mouth, asking only not to be lost completely. The night deepens until the earth itself seems to breathe more slowly. You stand where river mist drifts across a sleeping plain, softening the reeds, the old mounds, and the faint lines of abandoned canals. The stars are high now, cold and patient, shining above a world that has buried more memories than it has kept. Nothing moves quickly here. Even thought becomes slower. The question that began in clay now rests inside the darkness around you. What came before the Anunnaki? Not a single answer. Perhaps not one throne, one people, one vanished city, or one sealed tablet waiting politely beneath sand. The older truth may be wider, quieter, and more difficult to hold. It may be a landscape of memories. Archaeology confirms that Mesopotamian civilization grew from deep prehistoric roots, including earlier villages, ritual centers, farming communities, and sacred traditions. Scholars at Oxford, Chicago, Yale, and Pennsylvania have shown that Sumer inherited a world already shaped by millennia of human experiment, belief, labor, and loss. The gods arrived into history late. Memory arrived earlier. You walk past a mound under moonlight, and it seems almost alive. Beneath it may lie walls, hearths, graves, broken jars, seed stores, animal bones, and perhaps a tablet no hand has touched since its last reader died, or perhaps nothing remains there but mud brick melted into earth. Either way, the mound is not empty, it is a folded time. The fringe tidbit still whispers at the edge of the story. Some imagine a fully lost age before known civilization, ruled by beings later remembered as gods, sages, watchers, or powers beneath the earth. Scholars do not treat that as proven history, but the persistence of the idea reveals something important. Humans sense gaps in memory, and gaps invite figures to stand inside them. Sometimes those figures wear crowns, sometimes scales, sometimes stars. Among scholars, debate continues over how myth, archaeology, climate history, and oral tradition should be woven together. Researchers disagree on how much ancient stories preserve real events, symbolic truths, political claims, or ritual patterns. The careful answer is that they often preserve several things at once, like river silt holding seed, bone, ash, and broken pottery in the same dark layer. That is enough to wonder. The lost age may be hidden not because it was deliberately concealed, but because human memory is layered by nature. One culture builds over another. One god absorbs an older name. One ritual keeps a gesture after its meaning thins. One flood becomes many floods. One teacher becomes a being from the deep. The past does not disappear cleanly. It changes form. You hear the reeds move in the night wind. Their sound is soft, almost like distant voices speaking through sleep. Somewhere far away, water slides along an old channel. It may be natural now, but perhaps once hands guided it, repaired it, cursed it, blessed it, and depended upon it. A canal can outlive its builders, so can a fear, so can a hope. The Anunnaki, in later memory, stand as great powers within an ordered divine world. Yet beneath that order lie older depths. Water before naming, fire beside rivers, gardens before cities, stones before tablets, skies watched by people who had no written word for astronomy. These are not lesser mysteries. They are the ground from which the famous mysteries grow. You feel the scale of it. Not loudly, slowly. Humanity stands in the middle of the arrangement. Made from earth in story and shaped by earth in fact. People dig, plant, build, count, mourn, sing, and remember. They serve powers they cannot see, but they also create the very forms through which those powers are known. Without human voices, the gods fall silent. Without human hands, temples crumble. Without human memory, even heaven loses its names. This is not a triumphant revelation. It is gentler than that, and stranger. Perhaps the age before the Anunnaki was not only before them in time. Perhaps it remains beneath them in meaning, like an older floor under a temple, still supporting the steps of those who never look down. You imagine a scribe pausing over an ancient line. He does not know you. He does not know the future museum, the electric light, the quiet listener lying awake in another century. He only sees clay, duty, and a tradition older than himself. He copies the words because they must not vanish tonight. That is all preservation ever is. Not forever. Only not tonight. The sky begins to pale at the farthest edge of the plain. Dawn has not arrived, but darkness has loosened. The river mist turns silver. The mound becomes less like a sleeping animal and more like earth again. Ordinary shapes return, and with them the ordinary mercy of morning. Yet the question remains, what came before? Perhaps a succession of human worlds, each leaving fragments inside the next. Perhaps primordial powers shaped by imagination around water, sky, stone, and darkness. Perhaps memories of teachers, disasters, rituals, and old sacred places older than the names that later claimed them. Perhaps all of this. The ancient world rarely offers one key for one door. It gives you a ring of keys, half broken, some belonging to doors that no longer stand. You try them gently, not expecting certainty, but listening for the small sound of meaning turning. The reeds whisper again. The water keeps moving, and perhaps the story never truly ended. Perhaps the older age remains whenever humans look backward and feel that known history rests upon something deeper. It remains in the unease before ruins, in the reverence around graves, in the strange comfort of stars returning above troubled earth. So you let the question soften, you do not close it. The plain grows lighter, and the old mounds wait without explanation. Beneath them, clay sleeps, beneath clay, older earth. Beneath earth, water. Beneath water, perhaps only darkness, or perhaps the first memory of all. You breathe slowly now, and the ancient world breathes with you. The dust settles, the river murmurs, the stars fade one by one, not gone, only hidden by morning. The forgotten age withdraws with them, not erased, not solved, not fully named. It leaves behind a feeling, quiet and cool as dawn on stone. Perhaps that is all history can give at the edge of sleep. A doorway left open, a question kept warm, and perhaps the story is not yet complete. Now the night loosens its hold, and you do not need to follow every path any farther. The old rivers can keep their secrets for a little longer, the tablets can rest in their cases, the buried walls can remain beneath the gentle weight of earth. Patient and unharmed by silence, you have walked far enough. Let the ancient plain become soft around you. Let the reed beds blur into shadow. Let the moon lower itself beyond the edge of the world, while the first pale light gathers over fields no longer crowded by voices. Nothing is required of you now. No tablet must be read. No mystery must be solved. No lost name must be recovered before morning. The past has waited for thousands of years, and it can wait kindly through one more sleep. You may leave the gods in their dim chambers. You may leave the old teachers beside dark water. You may leave the first fires glowing low along forgotten rivers, watched by people whose names are gone, but whose warmth still reaches you through story. Breathe slowly. The air is cool. Imagine dust settling over a quiet courtyard, each grain finding its place without hurry. Imagine a lamp being covered by careful hands. Imagine a doorway closing softly, not to shut you out, but to protect the dream within. The river continues in darkness. The stars remain above the dawn, and somewhere beneath the plain, the oldest memory turns over in its sleep, calm, unfinished, and unafraid. You do not need certainty tonight. You only need the gentle shape of wonder, resting beside you like a small flame sheltered from wind. Let it grow dim. Let it grow warm, let it guide you down into stillness, where history becomes whisper, and whisper becomes breath, and breath becomes sleep. End of script. Good night.